Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The hidden room in the baker's basement wasn't on any floor plan. It wasn't supposed to exist, but as I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the ajar door I just discovered, I knew my life was about to change forever. I'd been babysitting for the Bakers for months now. Their daughter Lily was a sweet kid, easy to look after. The house was in one of those affluent neighborhoods where the lawns are always perfect and the cars in the driveways cost more than my college tuition. I never thought much about the family beyond our brief interactions. Mr. Baker was always polite. If a bit distant, Mrs. Baker was warm and chatty. They seemed normal, boring even, but normal people don't have hidden rooms filled with surveillance photos and cryptic documents. It started as a typical Thursday night. I arrived at 7 o'clock p.m. Just as Mr. Baker was heading out, he gave me the usual instructions: bedtime at 8:30, snacks in the kitchen, call if I need anything. I nodded along, already thinking about the history paper I'd work on once. Lily was asleep. The evening went smoothly. Lily and I played board games, then I tucked her in and read her a story. By 9 p.m. the house was quiet. I settled on the couch with my laptop, ready to dive into my essay on the French Revolution. That's when I heard it, a faint noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or the heating system kicking in, but it persisted, a soft mechanical roar that seemed out of place. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Leaving my laptop on the couch, I made my way to the basement door. The noise grew louder as I descended the stairs, my hand trailing along the cool concrete wall. The basement was finished with plush carpeting and recessed lighting. A large TV dominated one wall, surrounded by plush leather couches. A pool table stood in the corner. Everything screamed wealth and comfort, but the noise wasn't coming from any of that. It was emanating from behind a bookshelf tucked in the far corner. As I approached, I noticed something odd, a thin line of light peeking out from behind the shelf. My heart rate picked up. I ran my fingers along the edge of the bookcase, feeling for anything unusual there. A small indentation. I pressed it, and the bookshelf swung open with a soft click. Behind it was a door slightly ajar. The whirring noise was clear now, coming from within. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. This was wrong. I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be snooping, but my curiosity overwhelmed my better judgment. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, maybe 10 x 10 feet. The walls were lined with computer monitors, each displaying a different feed. I recognized some of the locations: the baker's front yard, their kitchen, even Lily's bedroom. Others showed places I didn't know: office buildings, parking lots, the interiors of what looked like other homes. In the center of the room stood a desk, its surface covered in papers and photographs. A sleek laptop sat open, lines of code scrolling across its screen. This was the source of the worrying, its fan working overtime. My breath caught in my throat as I approached the desk. The photos were a mix of surveillance shots and more personal images. I recognized Mr. Baker in many of them, but he looked different, harder. In some, he was speaking with men in suits. In others, he was handling what looked like large sums of cash. The documents were even more disturbing: financial records, transcripts of phone conversations, detailed schedules of people's daily routines. None of it made sense, but the pit in my stomach told me it was nothing good. I picked up one of the photos, my hand shaking. It showed Mr. Baker shaking hands with a man whose face I'd seen on the news, a businessman who'd been arrested last year for fraud and money laundering. The sound of a car door slamming made me jump. I dropped the photo, my heart leaping into my throat. Footsteps on the front porch, keys jingling in the lock. They were home early. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of here, had to pretend I'd never seen any of this. I rushed out of the hidden room, pulling the door shut behind me. The bookshelf swung back into place with a soft thud. I raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear voices now, Mr. and Mrs. Baker in the foyer. I burst into the living room, diving for the couch where I'd left my laptop. The front door opened just as I settled into position, my computer on my lap, trying to look as if I'd been there all along. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure they'd hear it. "Oh, hello there." Mrs. Baker's voice rang out, cheerful as ever. "How was Lily?" I looked up, forcing a smile. "She was great," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Went to bed without any fuss." Mr. Baker nodded, hanging up his coat. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something there, a flicker of suspicion perhaps, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Thanks for staying late," he said. "We got caught up at the charity event." I nodded, gathering my things. Every movement felt exaggerated, as if my body was screaming out my guilt. "No problem at all," I managed. "I got some studying done." As I made my way to the door, Mrs. Baker handed me my payment, a crisp $100 bill. "See you next week?" she asked. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Could I come back here knowing what I knew, but refusing would look suspicious? "Of course," I said, plastering on another smile. "Have a good night." The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, and I gulped it down gratefully. My car was parked at the curb, and I forced myself to walk to it at a normal pace. "Don't run," I told myself. "Act natural." Once inside, I locked the doors and sat, their hands gripping the steering wheel. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had seen. Who were the Bakers really? What was Mr. Baker involved in? I started the engine, desperate to put distance between myself and that house. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Mr. Baker stood in the doorway, watching me leave the porch. Light cast shadows across his face, making him look sinister and unfamiliar. I drove home on autopilot, my thoughts a chaotic whirl. What was I supposed to do with this information? Go to the police? But with what evidence? I had nothing but my word. And who would believe a college student babysitter over a respected businessman? When I got home, I checked all the locks on my apartment door. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I sat on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest, and tried to think rationally. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Mr. Baker was some kind of private investigator, and this was all for a case, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The cash, the shady meetings, the extensive surveillance, it all pointed to something illegal. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as my mind conjured up increasingly terrifying scenarios. By morning I'd made a decision. I couldn't go back to that house. I'd call Mrs. Baker, make up some excuse about my class schedule changing. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than walking back into what felt like a lion's den. But as I reached for my phone, it buzzed with an incoming text. My blood ran cold as I read the message from an unknown number. "Enjoyed your little exploration last night. Let's talk. Come to the house at 3 p.m. Come alone, or things will get unpleasant for you and your family." My hand shook as I dropped the phone. They knew somehow. They knew I'd been in that room. Had there been a hidden camera I hadn't noticed, or had I left some trace of my presence? I thought about running, about packing a bag and just driving until I couldn't anymore. But the thread hung heavy in my mind. Your family, the text had said. They knew who I was, who my loved ones were. I glanced at the clock. 10 a.m. 4 hours until I had to face whatever was waiting for me at the Bakers' house. 4 hours to figure out how I was going to get out of this mess alive. As I sat there, my mind racing through possibilities, one thing became crystal clear: my life, as I knew it, was over. Whatever happened at 2 p.m. I'd be stepping into a world I never asked to be part of, a world of secrets and dangers I couldn't begin to comprehend. The sunny Thursday evening, when I'd walked into the Baker's house, blissfully unaware, felt like a lifetime ago. Now I was trapped in a nightmare of my own curiosities, making with no clear way out. I looked out my window at the quiet street below, watching as my neighbors went about their normal lives. How I envied them their ignorance, because I knew that in 4 short hours I'd be facing the consequences of uncovering a truth that was never meant to be found. And I had no idea if I'd survive the encounter. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. I never expected my routine night patrol to turn into a fight for survival, but as I crouched behind a fallen oak, my hand trembling on my radio, I realized this night would change everything. My name's Jack, and I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Park for the better part of a decade. I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand. Turns out, I didn't know them nearly as well as I thought. It was a cool autumn night, the kind where your breath fogs in front of you, and the crunch of leaves underfoot seems to echo for miles. I'd been on edge lately. We'd found several mutilated animal carcasses in the past week, clear signs of poaching, but catching poachers in the act, that was like finding a needle in a haystack. I'd been walking my usual route for about an hour when I first heard it, a low murmur of voices barely audible over the ambient sounds of the forest. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, definitely human voices, and definitely not lost hikers at this hour. My heart rate picked up as I slowly moved towards the sound, keeping low and using the underbrush for cover. As I got closer, I could make out more details, multiple male voices speaking in hushed but excited tones, the metallic click of what could only be firearms being handled. I crept to the edge of a small clearing, and that's when I saw them. 5 men dressed in camo gathered around the carcass of what looked like a young elk. High-powered rifles leaned against nearby trees, and I could see the glint of hunting knives in the moonlight. My stomach churned. This wasn't just opportunistic poaching, this was an organized operation. I reached for my radio, intending to call for backup, but hesitated. We were understaffed as it was, and the nearest other ranger was at least an hour away. By the time help arrived, these guys would be long gone. I had to do something now. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the clearing, my hand on my sidearm. Gentlemen, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, I'm going to have to ask you to put down your weapons and put your hands where I can see them. For a moment, everything was still, then all hell broke loose. 2 of the men immediately grabbed for their rifles. Another lunged for me, a knife glinting in his hand. I managed to sidestep him, drawing my gun in one fluid motion. Stop right there, I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. I said, drop your weapons. The man with the knife hesitated, but the others were undeterred. One of them, a burly guy with a thick beard, leveled his rifle at me. You're outnumbered, Ranger, he growled. I walk away now, and we forget this ever happened. I stood my ground, my gun trained on him, acutely aware of how outmatched I was. Can't do that, I said. You boys are coming with me. The bearded man's eyes narrowed. Have it your way, he said, and fired. The shot went wide, splintering the trunk of a tree just inches from my head. I dove for cover behind a large boulder, my heart pounding in my ears. This was bad. This was very, very bad. I could hear them spreading out, trying to flank me. I risked a glance around the edge of the boulder and barely pulled back in time as another shot ricocheted off the rock face. Come on out, Ranger, one of them called. We just want to talk. Yeah, right. I knew full well that if I showed myself, I was as good as dead. These men had too much to lose to leave any witnesses. I fumbled for my radio, keeping my gun trained on the direction of their voices. This is Ranger Collins, I whispered urgently. I need immediate backup at Sector 7. Armed poachers. Shots fired. I repeat, shots fired. Static was my only reply. Either we were too deep in the woods for a signal, or they were jamming communications somehow. Either way, I was on my own. A twig snapped to my left, and I whirled, firing off a warning shot. Stay back, I shouted. Next one won't miss. Laughter echoed through the trees, cubic words for a man hiding behind a rock, one of them taunted. I gritted my teeth, trying to think. I couldn't stay here forever. but making a run for it would be suicide. I needed a plan. My eyes fell on the elk carcass still lying in the middle of the clearing. An idea began to form. It was risky, but it might be my only chance. Keeping low, I shrugged off my jacket and stuffed it with leaves and underbrush. It wasn't much, but in the dark it might pass for a human form, at least long enough to serve as a distraction. "All right," I called out, trying to sound defeated. "I'm coming out, don't shoot." I heard them shuffling, readying their weapons. Slowly I raised my makeshift dummy above the boulder with one hand, while I stayed hidden. "Hands where we can see them," one of them barked. I lifted the dummy higher, then suddenly flung it to the side. As I'd hoped, they took the bait. Multiple shots rang out, shredding my jacket. In that moment of confusion, I sprang into action. I sprinted for the elk carcass, diving behind it just as they realized their mistake. Bullets whizzed overhead, but the bulk of the animal provided better cover than the boulder had. Now, for phase 2 of my desperate plan, I took aim at the elk's bloated stomach and fired. The carcass burst open, releasing a stench so foul it made my eyes water. I heard retching and cursing from the poachers. Using the distraction, I made a break for the tree line. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. As I ran, I could hear them behind me, but the head start and the nauseating smell had given me an advantage. I ran like I'd never run before, zigging and zagging through the trees. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I knew these woods, but so did they. My only hope was to make it back to my Jeep before they caught up. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the tree line onto the narrow dirt road where I parked my Jeep. Sat there, a beautiful sight in the moonlight. Just as I reached for the door handle, a shot rang out. Pain exploded in my left arm, and I stumbled, crying out. I turned to see the bearded man emerging from the woods, his rifle trained on me. "End of the line, Ranger," he said, a cruel smile on his face. I leaned against the Jeep, my injured arm hanging uselessly at my side. Blood soaked my sleeve, and the pain was making it hard to think straight, but I wasn't done yet. "You're right," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It is the end of the line for you." His brow furrowed in confusion, then his eyes widened as he heard what I'd been praying for, the distant wail of sirens. In that moment of distraction, I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, both of us fighting for control of the rifle. Despite the pain in my arm, adrenaline gave me strength. I managed to wrench the gun from his grasp and bring the butt of it down hard on his head. He went limp beneath me. I staggered to my feet, the rifle clutched in my good hand, just as several patrol cars came into view, their lights painting the trees in red and blue. The cavalry had finally arrived. The next few hours passed in a blur. The other poachers were rounded up. My arm was patched up, and I gave statement after statement. By the time the sun rose, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, it was all over. As I sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, my boss approached. He looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. "You did good, Jack," he said, clapping me on my uninjured shoulder. "Those guys were part of a ring we've been trying to bust for months. You just broke the case wide open." I nodded, too exhausted to feel much beyond relief that I was still alive. "Get some rest," he continued, "and when you're back on your feet, well, let's just say there might be a promotion in your future." As he walked away, I gazed out at the forest. The same trees that had been a battlefield just hours ago now looked peaceful in the morning light. I knew I'd never look at these woods the same way again, but I also knew that I'd be back. This forest was my home, and I'd nearly died protecting it. Anything, this ordeal had only strengthened my resolve. There would be other poachers, other threats, and I'd be here standing guard, because that's what rangers do. We protect what can't protect itself, no matter the cost. I climbed into the ambulance, wincing as the movement jostled my injured arm. As we pulled away, I took one last look at the sea of green stretching out behind us. Yeah, I'd be back. These woods hadn't seen the last of Ranger Jack Collins, not by a long shot. The moment I clasped the vintage necklace around my neck, I had no idea I was putting a target on my back. It was beautiful, delicate, and seemed harmless. But some things are too good to be true, and this piece of jewelry was about to turn my life into a living nightmare. My name is Sarah, and until a week ago, I was just another face in the crowd, a 28-year-old graphic designer with a small art apartment in the city, a cat named Milo, and a penchant for online shopping. That's how this all started, with a late-night scrolling session and a seemingly innocent purchase. I'd been browsing a local buy and sell website looking for unique accessories to spruce up my wardrobe. That's when I saw it, a stunning Art Deco necklace with an intricate silver pendant and a deep blue stone that seemed to catch the light in the photograph. The seller, Karen, had listed it at a surprisingly reasonable price. Without a second thought, I clicked. By now, Karen and I arranged to meet at a local cafe the next day. She seemed nice enough, mid-30s, friendly smile, nothing out of the ordinary. We chatted over coffee as she handed me the necklace. It's been in my family for years, she said, a hint of something I couldn't quite place in her voice, sadness, relief. I hope you'll treasure it as much as we have. I assured her I would pay for the necklace, and we parted ways. As I walked home, I couldn't resist putting it on. The weight of it against my collarbone felt right, like it belonged there. That night, I wore it to a friend's birthday dinner. The compliments came rolling in, and I basked in the attention. It wasn't until I was walking home, the streets quiet and dark, that I first felt it, the sensation of being watched. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder. Nothing but shadows and street lights. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. By the time I reached my apartment building, I was almost running. I double-checked the locks. That night before going to bed, Milo curled up at my feet. I chalked it up to too much wine and an overactive imagination. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I got ready for work, absent-mindedly putting on the necklace again. It really did go with everything. It was lunchtime when things started to get weird. I was at my desk scrolling through my phone when a text from an unknown number popped up. Nice necklace. It suits you. I froze, my sandwich halfway to my mouth. I looked around the office, but everyone was engrossed in their own work. With shaking fingers, I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly, "A friend." And for now, I put my phone down, my appetite gone. It had to be a mistake, a wrong number. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept touching the necklace and wondering if I should take it off. But that was crazy, right? It was just a necklace. I was being paranoid. I was about to go to bed when I heard it, a soft scratching at my front door. Milo's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the quiet apartment. No answer, but the scratching continued. I approached the door on tiptoe, heart pounding. The peephole showed an empty hallway. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I opened the door. There on the vellum mat was a single red rose and a note. It belonged to me. First, I'll be coming for it. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and slid down to the floor, my back against the wood. Milo came over, butting his head against my hand. I scratched his ears absently, my mind racing. What had Karen gotten me into? I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me. I called Karen, but the number was disconnected. Frustrated, I decided to go to the cafe where we'd met, hoping the staff might remember her or have some information. As I approached the cafe, I saw her, Karen, sitting at an outside table looking nervous. Relief flooded through me. Finally, some answers. "Karen," I called out, quickening my pace. She looked up, her eyes widening in fear. Before I could reach her, a man appeared seemingly out of nowhere, grabbing her arm roughly. "Inside now," he growled loud enough for me to hear. They disappeared into the cafe. Just as I reached the table, I burst through the door after them, but they were gone. The barista looked at me quizzically. The couple that just came in, I panted. Where did they go? He shrugged. Didn't see anyone come in, miss. But I knew what I saw. Shaken, I left the cafe, my hand and instinctively going to the necklace. What had I gotten myself into? Over the next few days, the incidents escalated. More texts from unknown numbers, unmarked packages left at my door containing old photographs of the necklace on different women, a man in a dark coat following me home from work. I was a nervous wreck. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I was being stalked because of a necklace I bought online? They'd laugh me out of the station. I tried to distract myself with work, but I couldn't focus. My colleagues noticed, asking if I was okay. I brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about not sleeping well. It was Friday night when everything came to a head. I was working late trying to catch up on projects I'd fallen behind on. The office was empty. The only sound, the hum of my computer and the ticking of the wall clock. A noise in the hallway made me jump. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching my office. My heart raced as I watched the door handle turn slowly. The door swung open, revealing a man I'd never seen before, tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes that immediately fixed on the necklace at my throat. At last, he said, his voice smooth but menacing. I've been looking for that for a very long time. I stood up, putting the desk between us. Who are you? What do you want? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My name is Robert, and I want what's mine. He took a step forward, and I edged toward the window. The necklace isn't yours. I bought it fair and square. Robert laughed, a chilling sound. Oh my dear, nothing about this has been fair. The necklace has a long and bloody history. It's brought nothing but misfortune to its wearers, and now it's time for it to come home. As he spoke, he reached into his jacket. My blood ran cold as he pulled out a gun. Now, he said calmly, I'm going to need you to hand that over. Slowly my mind raced. The necklace suddenly felt heavy, like it was choking me. With trembling fingers, I reached for the clasp. Just then the office door burst open again. Karen rushed in, breathless. Sarah, don't. Robert whirled his gun, now trained on Karen. You, he snarled. I should have known you'd show up. Karen's eyes darted between Robert and me. Sarah, listen to me. The necklace is more than just jewelry. It's a key to something powerful and dangerous. That's why he wants it. Robert's face contorted with rage. Shut up, he shouted, his composure cracking in that moment of distraction. I acted on instinct. I grabbed the heavy paperweight from my desk and hurled it at Robert. It struck his hand, sending the gun clattering to the floor. Karen lunged for the weapon. While I ran for the door, I could hear them struggling behind me. As I raced down the hallway to the stairs, my feet pounded against the steps as I descended, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I burst out of the building into the cool night air, not daring to look back. I ran without direction, just needing to put distance between myself and what I'd left behind after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I found myself in a small park. I collapsed onto a bench, my hand going to the necklace. I wanted nothing more than to rip it off and throw it away, but something stopped me. Karen's words echoed in my mind, a key to something powerful and dangerous. As my breathing slowed, I heard footsteps approaching. I tensed, ready to run again, but it was Karen who emerged from the shadows, looking disheveled but unharmed. It's okay, she said, holding up her hands. He's gone for now. I sagged with relief. What's going on, Karen? What is this thing? I touched the necklace. She sat down beside me with a heavy sigh. It's a long story, one that goes back centuries. That necklace, it's not just a piece of jewelry, it's a key to an ancient vault hidden somewhere in this city, a vault that contains artifacts of immense power. I stared at her, trying to process this information. And Robert, he's part of an organization that's been searching for the key for generations. They'll stop at nothing to get it. I shook my head, overwhelmed. Why me? Why did you sell it to me? Karen looked at me, her eyes sad. I thought I could hide it in plain sight. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never meant for you to get caught up in this." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling over us finally. I stood up. "So what do we do now?" Karen stood too, a determined look on her face. "Now, we find the vault before they do, and we make sure whatever's inside never falls into the wrong hands." As we walked out of the park, the necklace seemed to pulse against my skin as if alive with possibility. I realized that my life had changed irrevocably. The normal mundane existence I'd known was gone. In its place was a world of secrets, danger, and untold power, and somehow I was now at the center of it all because of a necklace I'd bought on a whim. Life's funny like that. Sometimes one small decision, and suddenly you're in the middle of a century-old conflict with the fate of powerful artifacts resting on your shoulders. But as terrifying as it was, a small part of me was exhilarated. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. And so, with Karen by my side and a target on my back, I stepped into the night ready to face whatever came next. After all, I had a vault to find. The moment I saw Nurse Samantha slide those vials into her pocket, I knew my quiet night shift had just become a waking nightmare. What I didn't know was that it would be the longest night of my life, and I might not make it to morning. My name's Mike, and I've been working as a janitor at St. Andrew's Hospital for almost a year now. Night shift isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me out of trouble, or at least it used to. It was just past 3 a.m. That dead time of night, when even the hospital seems to hold its breath. I was making my usual rounds, mop in hand, nodding to the occasional nurse or orderly. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, mixing with the underlying S of sickness that never quite goes away in places like this. I just turned the corner onto the 3rd floor when I saw her. Nurse Samantha, a big woman with a reputation for being tough as nails, was standing by the supply closet. Nothing unusual there except for the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, her movements jerky, and nervous curiosity got the better of me. I hung back, pretending to be very interested in a particularly stubborn floor stain from the corner of my eye. I watched as Samantha fumbled with the closet lock, slipped inside, and emerged moments later with her hand suspiciously full. My heart skipped a beat as I saw her quickly pocket several vials of what I was pretty sure weren't aspirin. I'd seen enough TV to know what was going on here, but seeing it in real life, that was something else entirely. I must have made a noise, or maybe she just sensed she was being watched. Samantha's head snapped up, her eyes locking with mine. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the truth of what I'd witnessed hanging between us like a live wire. Then she smiled, and my blood ran cold. "Mike, isn't it?" she said, her voice honey sweet, but her eyes hard as flint. "Just the man I wanted to see. Could you come help me with something?" Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I go? This was my job, my livelihood. And who would believe the night janitor over a respected nurse? So like an idiot, I nodded and followed her into an empty patient room. The moment the door closed behind us, Samantha's demeanor changed. The sweet smile vanished, replaced by a snarl that made her look more animal than human. "Listen here, you little rat," she is backing me against the wall. "You didn't see anything, got it? And if you even think about opening your mouth, I'll make sure you regret it. Understand?" I nodded frantically, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "Yes, I understand. I didn't see nothing." She studied me for a moment, then stepped back, smoothing her scrubs. "Good, now get back to work. And Mike, remember, I know where you live." With that chilling reminder, she left, leaving me alone in the room, shaking like a leaf. For the next hour, I went through the motions of my job on autopilot, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. People could get hurt if Samantha was stealing medication, but the thought of what she might do if I talked, I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost ran right into Jor Patel, one of the senior physicians on the night shift. He studied me with a hand on my shoulder, his brow furrowing with concern. "Are you all right, Mike? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth, ready to spill everything, but Samantha's threat echoed in my mind instead. I mumbled something about not feeling well and hurried past him. As I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of Samantha watching me from the nurse's station, her eyes narrowed. Suspiciously, I quickened my pace, feeling her gaze boring into my back. The rest of the night was a game of cat and mouse. Every time I thought I was alone, Samantha would appear, reminding me of her presence with a pointed look or a too casual brush past me in the hallway. By the time 5 a.m. rolled around, my nerves were shot. I was emptying trash bins in the staff break room when I heard it, Samantha's voice, as low and urgent, coming from just outside the door. "I'm telling you, we've got a problem," she was saying. "The janitor saw me. We need to take care of it." My blood turned to ice. "Take care of it? What did that mean?" A male voice responded, too quiet for me to make out the words. Then Samantha again, "No, we can't wait. It has to be tonight before he has a chance to talk." I looked around, frantically searching for a way out, but the only exit was the door they were standing in front of. I was trapped. The voices moved away, and when I sagged against the wall, my mind reeling, this was no longer about stolen medication. They were talking about silencing me permanently. I had to get out of there, had to tell someone what was going on. But who? The police, hospital security? Would anyone believe me? Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and peeked out into the hallway. It was clear now or never. I made my way to the elevator as casually as I could, fighting the urge to break into a run. Just as the doors were about to close, a hand shot out, stopping them. My heart sank as Samantha stepped in, followed by a burly orderly I had seen around but never spoken to. "Going down, Mike?" Samantha asked, her tone conversational, but her eyes cold. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The elevator began its descent. The tension in the small space, so thick I could barely breathe. At the second floor, Samantha turned to me. "Oh, Mike, I just remembered. Could you help us with something in the basement? Won't take but a minute." It wasn't a request. The orderly's hand on my shoulder made that clear as we exited the elevator into the dimly lit basement. I knew with horrifying certainty that if I went with them, I wouldn't be coming back up. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I shoved the orderly as hard as I could, sending him stumbling into Samantha. Then I ran. I could hear them shouting behind me as I tore through the basement, dodging around storage shelves and equipment I had no plan, no destination in mind beyond the way. I burst through a fire exit, setting off alarms that pierced the pre-dawn quiet. The cool morning air hit me like a slap to the face. As I emerged into the hospital's rear parking lot behind me, I could hear the fire door slam open again. "Get him!" Samantha's voice rang out. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my feet pounding against the asphalt. I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. As I reached the street, a car screeched to a halt in front of me, nearly running me over. Dr. Patel leaned out of the driver's window, his eyes wide with shock. "Mike, what on earth?" "Please," I gasped, glancing over my shoulder to see Samantha and the orderly gaining on me. "Help me. They're trying to kill me." Maybe it was the desperation in my voice, or maybe he'd had his own suspicions about Samantha. Whatever the reason, Dr. Patel didn't hesitate. "Get in," he said, unlocking the doors. I dove into the passenger seat just as Samantha reached the car. Dr. Patel floored, leaving her cursing in our wake as we sped away from the hospital. Words poured out of me in a frantic jumble. I told him everything: the stolen medication, the threats, the conversation I'd overheard. Dr. Patel listened silently, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, he nodded grimly. "I've suspected something was going on for a while now," he said, "but I had no proof until now." He pulled out his phone, keeping one hand on the wheel. "I'm calling the police and the hospital administrator. This ends now." As I watched him make the calls, relief washed over me, followed quickly by exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading, leaving me drained. "What happens now?" I asked. As he hung up, Dr. Patel gave me a reassuring smile. "Now we get you somewhere safe. The police will meet us, and you'll tell them everything you told me. Samantha and her accomplices won't get away with this." As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a glimmer of hope. The night shift from hell was over, but a new day was dawning, a day where the truth would come out and justice would be served. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. Who would have thought that a simple janitor like me would end up bringing down a drug ring? Life sure has a way of surprising you. One thing was for certain: I was never going to look at night shifts the same way again. But hey, at least I had one hell of a story to tell, assuming, of course, that I lived long enough to tell it. The crackling of our campfire was drowned out by the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being cocked. In that moment, I realized our peaceful camping trip had just become a fight for survival. My name's Alex, and what started as a weekend getaway with my closest friends turned into the most terrifying experience of our lives. Looking back, I still can't believe we made it out alive. It was supposed to be a perfect trip. Me, my best friend Tom, his girlfriend Sarah, and our mutual friend Jake had been planning this camping excursion for months. We'd found a secluded spot deep in the national forest, far from the usual tourist trails, the kind of place where you could really disconnect from the world and immerse yourself in nature. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun already starting to dip behind the trees. The spot was even more beautiful than we'd imagined, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines with a babbling creek nearby. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and settled in for what we thought would be a relaxing evening. As night fell, we sat around the campfire sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. The stars came out more brilliant than I'd ever seen them away from the city lights. It was exactly the escape we've been hoping for. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Sarah asked. Suddenly her head tilted to one side. We all fell silent, straining our ears. "Oh, at first I didn't hear anything beyond the usual nighttime forest sounds, the crackle of our fire, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. Then I heard it, a faint rustling too deliberate to be the wind, the sound of footsteps trying to be quiet and not quite succeeding. Probably just an animal," Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jake stood up, peering into the darkness beyond our campfire's glow. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then more rustling, closer this time. "Guys," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I think we should." She never got to finish that sentence. A figure burst into the clearing, then another, and another before we could react. We were surrounded by at least half a dozen men, all carrying weapons, rifles, shotguns, even a crossbow. They looked like they'd raided a sporting goods store. Well, drawled one of the men, clearly the leader. He was tall and lean with a scraggly beard and cold eyes. "What do we have here? Looks like we've got ourselves some trespassers, boys." I stood up slowly, my hands raised in what I hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "Look, we don't want any trouble. If this is private property, we'll leave right away." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, it ain't about trespassing, city boy. It's about being in the wrong place at the wrong time." He nodded to two of his men who moved forward and started rifling through our belongings. I watched helplessly as they emptied our backpacks, pocketing anything of value. "Please," Sarah whimpered, "just take what you want and let us go." The leader's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, and I saw something in his gaze that made my blood run cold. "Oh, we'll take what we want, all right, but letting you go now, that's going to be a problem." Tom stepped in front of Sarah protectively. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, the leader raised his shotgun and fired into the air. The blast echoed through the forest, and we all flinched. "It means," he said, lowering the gun to point at us, "that you folks know too much. Can't have you running back to Civilization telling tales about us. Realization dawned on me, these weren't just random thugs looking to rob some campers. This was something bigger, more organized. We'd stumbled into something we were never supposed to see. On your knees, the leader barked, hands behind your heads. We complied, exchanging terrified glances. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. But with guns trained on us from every direction, any move seemed suicidal. One of the men approached, the leader speaking in a low voice. I strained to hear what they were saying. Military-grade stuff worth millions. Pick up tomorrow night. The leader nodded, then turned back to us with a sinister grin. Looks like you kids get to live a little longer. We've got some business to take care of, and we need some, let's call it insurance. He pointed at Jake. You up? You're coming with us. The rest of you are staying right here with my friends. And if you so much as think about trying anything, well, he left the threat unspoken, but the meaning was clear. Jake looked at us, panic in his eyes, as two of the men grabbed him and started dragging him away. I wanted to do something to stop them, but the gun barrel pressed against the back of my head kept me rooted to the spot. As Jake disappeared into the darkness with half of our captors, the remaining men herded us into one of the tents. They zip-tied our hands behind our backs and our ankles together, then posted guards outside. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. We whispered amongst ourselves, trying to make sense of what was happening and figure out a plan. But with Jake gone and us trussed up like Thanksgiving turkeys, our options were limited. We have to do something, Tom muttered, our frustration evident in his voice. We can't just sit here and wait for them to kill us. But what can we do? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. They have guns. They took Jake. We don't even know where we are. I closed my eyes, trying to think there had to be a way out of this. That's when I remembered my Swiss Army knife. I always kept it in my sock when camping, a habit born from too many times needing a tool and not having one handy. If I could just reach it. Guys, I whispered, I have an idea, but you need to create a distraction. I explained my plan quickly, aware that at any moment one of our captors could check on us. Tom and Sarah nodded, determination replacing fear in their eyes. Sarah started screaming, thrashing around as much as her bonds would allow. Help, please, I can't breathe. We heard muffled cursing outside, then the tent flap opened, and one of the men stuck his head and shut up in there. Please, Tom pleaded, playing along. I think she's having a panic attack. She needs air. The man hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do, while his attention was on Tom and Sarah. I contorted myself, ignoring the pain, as I managed to work the knife out of my sock and into my bound hands. Just as the man was about to call for backup, I freed myself in one unfluid motion. I launched myself at him, catching him off guard. We went down in a tangle of limbs, and I heard the sickening crunch as his head hit a rock. He went limp, and for a terrifying moment I thought I killed him, but a faint grin told me he was just unconscious. I quickly freed Tom and Sarah, and we armed ourselves with rocks and sticks, pitiful weapons against guns. But better than nothing, we crept out of the tent, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give us away. The other guard was a few yards away, his back to us, as he peed against a tree. It was now or never. Tom moved first, bringing a heavy branch down on the man's head. He crumpled without a sound. We need to find Jake, Sarah whispered urgently. I nodded, but I knew our priority had to be getting help. We need to get to the road, find a phone. We can't take these guys on our own. Torn between the need to save our friend and the reality of our situation, we made the hardest decision of our lives. We ran. The forest was pitch black, branches whipping in our faces. As we stumbled through the underbrush, every shadow looked like a pursuer, but we kept going, driven by pure adrenaline and the will to survive. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we broke through the tree line onto a dirt road. In the distance, we could see headlights approaching. Hey, We screamed, waving our arms frantically. "Stop, help!" The car screeched to a halt, and an elderly couple peered out at us in confusion. We must have looked insane, dirty, bleeding, wild-eyed with fear. "Oh, please," I gasped. "We need help, our friend." "Men with guns, please call the police." The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars and helicopters descended on the area. We were questioned, checked over by paramedics, given blankets and hot coffee. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a police officer approached us with news they'd found the camp, arrested several men, and rescued Jake. He was shaken, but unharmed. Relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. We'd made it, we'd survived. In the days that followed, the full story came out. The men were part of a weapon smuggling ring using the remote forest as a transfer point. Our campsite had been right in the middle of their operation. We were hailed as heroes for helping bring down the smuggling ring, but honestly, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt lucky to be alive, lucky to have my friends safe, lucky that our weekend getaway hadn't become our final adventure. As I sit here now recounting this story, I can't help but think how quickly life can change. One moment you're roasting marshmallows with your friends, the next you're running for your life through a dark forest. But I also learned something about myself, about the strength we all have inside us. When pushed to the brink, I learned that sometimes survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. Sometimes it's about being willing to take a chance when all seems lost. And yeah, maybe I'll think twice about camping in secluded areas from now on, but I won't let fear stop me from living. After all, we've got one hell of a campfire story now. I never thought I'd be thankful for a broken coffee maker, but that faulty appliance saved my life. If it hadn't forced me to that little cafe on 3rd Street, I might never have escaped the man who nearly destroyed me. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how I fell in love with a monster and how I clawed my way back to freedom. It started on a Tuesday. My ancient coffee maker had finally given up the ghost, sputtering out its last bitter drops before dying with an ominous electrical smell. Caffeine deprived and irritable, I ducked into the first cafe I saw on my way to work. That's where I met Mark. He was ahead of me in line, tall and broad-shouldered, with a smile that lit up his whole face. When the barista called out his order, a vanilla latte, he turned and caught me staring. "Sweet tooth," he said with a wink, holding up his drink. My guilty pleasure, I laughed, charmed despite myself. No judgment here. I'm about to order the sugariest thing on the menu. We got to talking, and before I knew it, he convinced me to sit with him for a few minutes. Those few minutes turned into an hour, and I ended up being late for work. But I didn't care. Mark was funny, smart, and attentive in a way that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. As I finally rushed out, already planning how I'd explain my tardiness to my boss, Mark caught my hand. "Can I see you again?" he asked, those blue eyes sparkling with hope. I didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. Looking back, I wonder if things would have been different if I'd said no, if I'd just gotten my coffee and gone to work like any other day. But I can't change the past, I can only learn from it. Our first date was perfect. Mark took me to a little Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street I'd never noticed before. He ordered wine, pulled out my chair, and listened intently to every word I said. By the time to dessert came around, I was already half in love. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mark was attentive, calling and texting regularly. He surprised me with flowers at work, planned romantic picnics, and always seemed to know just what to say to make me smile. My friends were thrilled for me. "He sounds amazing," my best friend Sarah gushed over brunch. "You deserve this, Em. After everything with Jake," she trailed off. But I knew what she meant. My ex Jake had been a nightmare, controlling, jealous, and eventually abusive. It had taken me months to break free from that relationship. Mark was like a breath of fresh air after being underwater for so long, or so I thought. The first red flag was so small, I almost missed it. We were out at a bar with some of Mark's friends, and I was chatting with one of the guys about a book we both read. Mark came over, sliding his arm around my waist. His grip was a little too tight, his smile a little too forced. "Having fun?" he asked, but his eyes were cold. Later that night, he exploded. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, as soon as we were alone, flirting with Tom right in front of me. I was stunned. "Flirting, Mark? We were just talking about a book." But he wouldn't hear it. He ranted for what felt like hours, accusing me of disrespecting him, of trying to make him jealous. By the end of it, I was in tears, apologizing for something I hadn't even done. The next morning, he was all apologies. "I'm so sorry, baby," he said, bringing me breakfast in bed. "I don't know what came over me. I just care about you so much. The thought of losing you scares me." I forgave him, of course. After all, everyone has bad moments, right? But that was just the beginning. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Mark began to change. Or maybe the mask just started to slip. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was with, what I was wearing. He'd show up unannounced at my workplace, claiming he just wanted to surprise me. He insisted I share my phone's location with him. For safety, my world began to shrink. I saw my friends left. Unless Mark always had a reason why we couldn't go out, why we should stay in just the two of us. When I did see them, he'd blow up my phone with texts and calls. "I just miss you," he'd say. When I confronted him about it, "Is it so wrong to want to talk to my girlfriend?" I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just what love looked like. Then came the night that changed everything. We were at his place, having dinner. I mentioned that a coworker had invited me to a concert that weekend. Mark's face darkened. "Who's this coworker?" he demanded. "Just a friend," I said, my stomach already nodding with anxiety. "His name's Alex. He had an extra ticket." And I didn't get to finish. Mark's fist came down on the table so hard the glasses toppled over, spilling red wine across the white tablecloth like blood. "Is Mark Lord you're going out with another man?" "It's not like that," I protested, my voice small. "It's just a concert. There'll be a whole group of us." But Mark was beyond reason. He advanced on me, his face twisted with rage. For the first time, I was truly afraid of him. "You're not going," he snarled. "You're mine, Emily. Do you understand? Mine." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. I cried out, trying to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Mark, you're hurting me." Something in my voice must have gotten through to him. He let go abruptly, stumbling back. Horror flashed across his face, quickly replaced by remorse. "Oh God, Emily, I'm so sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean to. I would never hurt you. You know that, right?" But I did know. In that moment, I saw Mark clearly for the first time. This wasn't love. This was control, manipulation, abuse. And it would only get worse. "I have to go," I said, grabbing my purse with shaking hands. Mark tried to stop me, alternating between apologies and accusations, but I pushed past him. I ran out of his apartment, down the stairs, and into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached Sarah's apartment. She opened the door, took one look at my tear-stained face, and pulled me into a hug. "OM," she whispered. "What did he do that night?" As I poured out the whole story to Sarah, I felt the fog lifting. How had I not seen it before? The isolation, the jealousy, the control. It was Jake all over again, just in a different package. "You can't go back," Sarah said firmly. "He dangerous, Em." I knew she was right, but I also knew it wouldn't be that easy. The next few weeks were hell. Mark called and texted constantly. He showed up at my work, my apartment, even Sarah's place. Each time he swung between desperate pleas for forgiveness and veiled threats. "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do," he'd say. "You're making a big mistake. You'll regret this." I changed my number, my email, even moved to a new apartment but still he found ways to reach me. It all came to a head one rainy night. I was walking home from the subway when I saw him. Mark was leaning against my building, his eyes locked on me. My blood ran cold. Emily, he called out, his voice deceptively gentle. We need to talk. I turned and ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me getting closer. Rain lashed at my face as I sprinted down the street, my heart pounding in my ears. I ducked into an elite diner breathless and soaked. The waitress took one look at my face and ushered me to a booth in the back. You okay, honey? She asked, concern etched on her weathered face. I shook my head, tears mixing with raindrops on my cheeks. There's a man, he's following me. He won't leave me alone, understand? And dawned in her eyes. She nodded once, then turned to the cook. Call the cops. And Joe, we've got a situation. When the police arrived, I told them everything about the emotional abuse, the control, the stalking. They took my statement, promised to pick Mark up for questioning. As I sat there wrapped in a blanket the kind waitress had given me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. The road to recovery wasn't easy. There were restraining orders, court dates, and countless therapy sessions. There were nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, certain I'd heard Mark's voice. Days when I jumped at every shadow, convinced he was just around the corner. But slowly, surely, I began to heal. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into work, and started to rediscover who I was without the shadow of Mark looming over me. Now, as I sit here in that same see where it all began, I can't help but reflect on how far I've come. The Emily who met Mark that day feels like a stranger to me now. She was looking for love in all the wrong places, willing to accept crumbs of affection and call it a feast. But the Emily writing this, she knows her worth. She knows that real love doesn't diminish you, it helps you grow. Real love is supportive, not suffocating. Real love is a partnership, not a possession. I'm not ready to date again, not yet. But when I am, I'll be going in with my eyes wide open, because while my experience with Mark was traumatic, it taught me valuable lessons about red flags, about trusting my instincts, and most importantly about the strength I have within me. So if you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, know this: you're stronger than you think. You deserve better, and there is a way out. As for me, I'm ordering my coffee with extra sugar just because I can. And I'm looking forward to whatever the future holds, because for the first time in a long time, that future is entirely my own. The neon and open news sign flickered ominously as I flipped it off, not knowing that in just a few hours I'd be fighting for my life in this godforsaken gas station. My name's Jack, and this is the story of the night shift that nearly killed me. I'd been working at Pete's Gas and Go for about 6 months. It wasn't glamorous, but the night shift paid better, and it gave me time to study for my college classes during the slow hours. Plus, in a small town like ours, night shifts were usually quiet. Usually it was a Tuesday night, well, Wednesday morning, really about 3 a.m. I just finished restocking the coolers and was settling in behind the counter with my biology textbook when I heard the rumble of an engine outside. I glanced up at the security mirror, expecting to see some blur-eyed traveler stopping for a caffeine fix. Instead, I saw a beat-up van pull up to the pump furthest from the store. 3 men got out, and something about the way they moved set off alarm bells in my head. They were too alert for this time of night, their movements too purposeful. I watched as 2 of them started to fill up the van, while the third headed towards the store. As he got closer, I could see he was a big guy, easily 6 feet 4 inches, and built like a linebacker. The bell above the door chimed. As he entered up close, he looked even more intimidating. A jagged scar ran from his left eye to his chin, and his eyes darted around the store, taking everything in. Evening, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Can I help you find anything? He turned those cold eyes on me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Just browsing, he grunted, then headed down one of the aisles. I kept one eye on him as he meandered through the store, picking up random items. and putting them back. Something wasn't right. My hand inched towards the panic button under the counter, but I hesitated. What if I was overreacting? I didn't want to call the cops for no reason. The bell chimed again, and the other two men entered. They were smaller than their friend, but no less menacing. One had a tattoo of a snake coiling up his neck, while the other had a nervous energy about him, his eyes constantly moving. Find everything okay? I asked, my mouth dry. Snake tattoo smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, yeah, we found just what we needed. That's when I saw the gun tucked into his waistband. My heart started racing. This was really happening. We were in the middle of nowhere, at least an hour from the nearest town. No one was coming to save me. Listen, fellas, I said, raising my hand slowly. The register doesn't have much cash, maybe a couple $100. It's not worth. Shut up, Scarface growled, pulling out his own gun. We're not here for the chump change in your register, kid. This is just a pit stop. Nervous guy locked the front door and pulled down the blinds. How long? He asked Scarface. Hour, maybe two, Scarface replied. Enough time for our friend to patch himself up and for us to figure out our next move. That's when I noticed the dark stain on Snake tattoo shirt. Blood. These guys were on the run, and they were wounded. This was bad. This was very, very bad. All right, kid, Scarface said, turning back to me. Here's how this is going to go. You're going to sit tight and keep your mouth shut. You play nice. Maybe you walk away from this. You try to be a hero. He let the thread hang in the air. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Scarface motioned to nervous guy who came around the counter and zip-tied my hands behind my back. They marched me to the storeroom in the back, shoving me down onto an overturned milk crate. Sit tight, Scarface said with a smirk. We'll be checking on you. The door closed, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. I could hear them moving around the store, talking in low voices. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this mess. I don't know how long I sat there, my hands going numb from the tight zip ties, listening to the muffled voices outside. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seems to lose all meaning when you're scared out of your mind. Suddenly the door opened. It was Snake Tattoo, his shirt now off, revealing a crude bandage on his side. He was sweating, his eyes glassy with pain or fever. Water, he grunted, nodding towards the cases of bottled water stacked against the wall. I stood up awkwardly, my bound hands making it difficult to keep my balance. I can't exactly grab it for you, I said, turning slightly to show him my tied hands. He grunted again, then stepped forward to grab a bottle himself. As he did, he stumbled slightly, catching himself on the shelf. The movement caused him to writhe in pain, and I saw fresh blood seeping through his bandage. You need a hospital, I said before I could stop myself. Snake Tattoo's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. What I need, he snarled, is for you to shut your mouth. But I was already committed. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe I was just tired of feeling helpless, but I pressed on. Look, I don't know what you guys are mixed up in, but that wound looks bad if it gets infected, I said. Shut up. He backhanded me across the face and sending me sprawling onto the concrete floor. Pain exploded in my cheek, and I tasted blood. But as I lay there, my face pressed against the cold floor, I saw something that made my heart leap. A box cutter. Rock must have fallen off one of the shelves, lay just a few feet away. Snake Tattoo was too busy trying to open his water bottle with shaking hands to notice. I inched towards the box cutter, praying he wouldn't look down. Just as my fingers closed around the handle, nervous guy, Tommy's getting antsy, he said to Snake Tattoo, says we need to move soon. Snake Tattoo cursed under his breath. Tell him to cool it. I'm not going anywhere until this bleeding stops. Nervous guy's eyes darted to me, then back to Snake Tattoo. What about him? We can't just leave him here. We'll figure it out. Snake Tattoo snapped. Now get out of here and let me rest. As soon as the door closed, I started working on my bonds. It was awkward and slow going and trying to maneuver the box cutter with my hands behind my back. I could feel the sharp blade nicking my skin but I didn't care. Freedom was worth a few cuts. Just as I felt the zip tie give way, the door opened again. This time it was Scarface, and he did not look happy. "Time's up," he growled. "We're moving out now." Snake Tattoo struggled to his feet, his face pale and drawn. "I told you, I need more time." Scarface wasn't having it. "Cops found the car we ditched. They'll be expanding their search. We need to go." That's when he noticed me still on the ground, but with my hands now free. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. I didn't give him time to react. I launched myself at him, driving my shoulder into his midsection. We went down in a tangle of limbs, his gun skittering across the floor. What followed was a desperate, frenzied fight. I was younger and fueled by terror and adrenaline, but Scarface was bigger and meaner. He landed a solid punch to my ribs that left me gasping for air, but I had surprise on my side and desperation. As we grappled on the ground, my hand closed around a heavy flashlight that had fallen from one of the shelves. I swung it with all my might, catching Scarface on the temple. He went limp, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I'd killed him. But then I saw his chest rise and fall. He was just unconscious. I scrambled to my gun. Snake Tattoo was leaning heavily against the wall, looking like he might pass out at any moment. He didn't even try to stop me. As I ran past him, I burst out of the storeroom, gun raised, only to find nervous guy already had his hands up. He clearly heard the commotion and decided he wanted no part of it. "Don't shoot," he pleaded. "I'm done, man. I give up." My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the gun steady on the ground. I managed to say, "Face down, hands behind your head." As soon as he was down, I ran for the phone behind the counter. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911, my voice cracking as I told the dispatcher what had happened. The next hour was a blur. Police cars and ambulances descended on the gas station, their lights painting everything in surreal shades of red and blue. I gave my statement over and over, first to the local cops, then to the state police, and finally to a couple of FBI agents. Turns out these guys were part of crew that had pulled off a series of armed robberies across 3 states. The cops had been after them for months, and little old me, the night shift gas station attendant, had brought them down. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the chaos of the crime scene, one of the FBI agents approached me. "You did good, kid," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not many people would have had the guts to do what you did." I nodded, too exhausted to form words. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving me feeling hollowed out and shaky. "Get some rest," the agent continued. "We'll need you to come in later to sign some papers, but for now, go home." It sounded like heaven. As I walked to my car, I caught my reflection in the window. A bruise was blooming on my cheek, and there was dried blood on my shirt. I barely recognized myself. One thing was for sure, I was done with night shifts at gas stations. Maybe it was time to reconsider that accounting major my parents were always pushing for. Suddenly a nice boring desk job sounded pretty damn good. I climbed into my car and started the engine, casting one last look at the gas station that had nearly been there. Death of me, the open sign was still dark and probably would be for a while. As I pulled out onto the empty highway, the rising sun warm on my face, I couldn't help but laugh. Who would have thought that a simple night shift could turn into the craziest night of my life? But hey, at least I had one hell of a story for my next class presentation. What I did on my summer vacation, foiled and armed 3 fugitives, yeah, that ought to get me. Another moment, I stumbled upon that clearing in the woods. I knew I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. What I didn't know was that the next 24 hours would be a fight for my life, testing every ounce of strength. And will I possess? My name's Sarah, and I'm an avid hiker. There's nothing I love more than losing myself in nature, feeling the crunch of leaves under my boots and breathing in the crisp forest air. That's why I decided to take a solo hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains, just me, my backpack, and miles of pristine wilderness. I'd been on the trail for 3 days, reveling in the solitude and the breathtaking views. On the fourth morning, I woke up early, eager to cover some ground before the heat of the day set, and the trail I'd chosen was less traveled, winding through dense forest and rocky outcroppings. It was challenging, but that's how I liked it. As the sun climbed higher, I decided to take a short detour off the main path. There was a small stream marked on my map that looked like a perfect spot for a lunch break. I pushed through some thick underbrush, the sound of running water growing louder. That's when I saw it. The clearing was man-made, that much was obvious. Tarps were strung up between trees, creating makeshift shelters. But it was what was under those tarps that made my blood run cold. Crates, dozens of them. And next to those crates, weapons, the kind you don't see outside of war zones. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Gun runners, drug smugglers, whatever it was. I knew I'd stumbled onto something dangerous. I took a step back, ready to get the hell out of there, when a twig snapped under my foot. The sound seemed to echo through the clearing. "Hey, who's there?" A gruff voice shattered the silence. My heart leaped into my throat as I saw a man emerge from one of the shelters, a rifle in his hands. I didn't think. I ran crashing through the underbrush. I could hear shouts behind me. They were coming. The peaceful forest that had been my refuge was now a deadly maze, and I was the prey. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But I didn't dare slow down. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer. There, I see her. A bullet whizzed past my ears, splintering the bark of a tree just inches from my head. They were shooting at me. This was real. This was happening. I veered off to the left, hoping to lose them in a particularly dense patch of forest. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming for rest, but stopping wasn't an option. As I ran, my mind raced almost as fast as my feet. I needed a plan. I couldn't outrun them forever. I needed to outsmart them. The ground began to slope upward, and I remembered seeing a series of cliffs on my map. If I could reach higher ground, maybe I could find a place to hide, to catch my breath and think. I scrambled up the incline, using roots and rocks as handholds. The shouts behind me were growing fainter, but I didn't dare hope I'd lost them. These men knew these woods probably better than I did. Finally, I reached a small plateau. Gasping for air, I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. That's when I saw it, a narrow crevice in the rock face, just big enough for a person to squeeze through without hesitation. I shinned into the gap. It was a tight fit, the rough stone scraping against my skin, but I pushed on. The crevice opened up into a small cave, damp and dark, but blessedly hidden. I slumped against the cool rock, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Outside, I could hear my pursuers. Where'd she go? She can't have gotten far. Spread out and find her. I stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes ticked by like hours. I could hear them searching, their voices sometimes fading, sometimes growing alarmingly close. As the initial surge of adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was trapped in a cave, being hunted by armed men, miles from any help. My phone had no signal this deep in the wilderness. No one knew exactly where I was or when to expect me back. I was on my own. As night fell, the temperature dropped. I huddled in my cave, shivering, straining my ears for any sound of my pursuers. They were still out there. I could hear them occasionally, their flashlight beams sweeping across the forest floor. I knew I couldn't stay in the cave forever. I needed to find a way out of these woods to get to safety and alert the authorities. But how? As I sat there, my mind racing through possibilities, I remembered something from my many hiking trips. Search and rescue often used rivers as landmarks. If I could find the stream I'd been looking for earlier, I might be able to follow it out of the forest. It was risky. I'd have to leave the safety of my hiding spot and navigate in the dark, but it was the only plan I had. I waited until the forest had been quiet for a while, then slowly, painfully squeezed out of the crevice. The night was pitch black, the canopy above blocking out any moonlight. I took a deep breath, oriented myself as best I could, and started moving. Every step was agonizing. I had to move slowly to avoid making noise. But every moment I was exposed felt like an eternity. More than once, I froze at the sound of a snapping twig or rustling leaves, sure I'd been discovered. After what felt like hours, I heard it, the faint sound of running water. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I quickened my pace, and following the sound, I was so focused on the stream that I almost missed the voices. I dropped to the ground just as a flashlight beam swept over the spot where I'd been standing. I'm telling you, I heard something, probably just an animal. The girl's long gone by now. Boss ain't going to like that. You know what was in those crates. If she talks, my breath caught in my throat. Whatever was in those crates, it was big enough that these men were willing to kill to keep it secret. I lay there barely breathing as the men moved past me. Once I was sure they were gone, I crawled towards the stream, staying low to the ground. When I reached the water, I nearly cried with relief. It wasn't much, just a small creek really, but it was flowing downhill. Civilization would be downhill. I began to follow the stream, moving as quickly as I dared. The sound of the water masked my movements, and I made better time than I had in the forest. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I heard a sound that made my heart soar. Cars, a road. I was close to civilization. I quickened my pace, hope giving me strength. I didn't know I had left. The trees began to thin, and suddenly I was there. A two-lane highway stretched out before me, blessedly empty in the early morning light. I wanted to collapse right there on the asphalt, but I knew I couldn't stop, not yet. I needed to get help, to tell someone about what I'd seen. I started walking, my thumb out, praying for a car to come by. After what felt like an eternity, I saw headlights approaching. An old pickup truck slowed to a stop beside me. An elderly man peered out at me, concern etched on his weathered face. "You all right, miss? You look like you've been through hell." I probably looked a mess, clothes torn, scratched, and bruised, wild-eyed with exhaustion and fear. But at that moment, this kind stranger was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. "Please," I said, my voice horror from dehydration and fear. "I need help. I need to call the police." He didn't ask questions, just nodded and unlocked the passenger door. As we drove towards the nearest town, I told him an abbreviated version of what had happened. He listened silently, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When we reached the local police station, he insisted on coming in with me just to make sure. "You're okay," he said gruffly. The next few hours were a blur of questions and statements. Local police, or then state troopers, then the FBI. I told my story over and over, marking locations on maps, describing what I'd seen in that clearing. Men found the camp, but it had been abandoned. The crates, the weapons, the men, all gone. But they found enough evidence to corroborate my story. Bullet casings that matched the shots fired at me, traces of whatever had been in those crates, something highly illegal, they said, though they wouldn't give me details. As I sat in the police station, wrapped in a shock blanket and sipping bad coffee, the reality of what I'd been through began to sink in. I'd stumbled upon a major criminal operation. I'd been hunted, shot, and nearly killed, and I had survived. The FBI agent in charge approached me, a look of good out there. He said not many people would have made it out of those woods alive. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. He continued, "We're going to need to put you in protective custody for a while, just until we're sure it's safe." Part of me wanted to protest. I had a life, a job, friends, and family who would worry, but a larger part of me knew he was right. The men in the woods were still out there, and they knew what I looked like as I was led out of the station to a waiting SUV with tinted windows I cast one last look at the mountains in the distance. They had always been a place of peace for me, a refuge from the stresses of everyday life. Now they loomed on, ominously hiding dangers I'd never imagined. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I'd ever feel safe in the wilderness again, but I did. No one thing, I was alive against all odds. I'd survived, and whatever came next I'd face it with the same determination that had gotten me out of those woods. As the SUV pulled away, carrying me towards an uncertain future, I made a silent promise to myself I would not let fear win. Someday, somehow, I would find my way back to the trails, because those mountains had tried to kill me, but they had also shown me just how strong I could be. And that was a lesson worth nearly dying for. The flickering neon sign of the Stardust Motel should have been my first warning, but after 12 hours on the road, all I wanted was a bed and a hot shower. I had no idea that checking into room 15 would be the beginning of the longest night of my life. My name's Alex, and I'm a traveling salesman. Cheap motels and long stretches of highway are my second home. I've seen my fair share of dingy rooms and sketchy characters, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night at the Stardust. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot around 11 p.m. The hotel was one of those old-school single-storied places you see dotting the highways of rural America, paint peeling, rust stains on the walls. But beggars can't be choosers when you're in the middle of nowhere. The office was dim lit only by the glow of an ancient TV. Behind the counter sat a man who looked as old and worn as the motel itself. His roomy eyes fixed on me as I approached. "Need a room?" I said, stifling a yawn. He grunted, reaching for a key without taking his eyes off me. 27 cash checkouts at 11. I handed over the money, and he slid the key across the counter. "Room 13, great. Anywhere to grab a bite around here?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Kitchen's closed, vending machines busted. Nearest place is 30 miles down the road, of course." It was. I sighed, resigning myself to the granola bar and lukewarm water bottle in my car. As I turned to leave, the old man spoke again. "Word of advice, a stranger, lock your door, don't open it for nobody." I paused, a chill running down my spine despite the stuffy warmth of the office. Why is that? He just stared at me, then turned back to his TV. Conversation over. I guess outside the night seemed darker than before. The few street lights in the parking lot cast sickly yellow pools on the cracked asphalt. I hurried to my room, suddenly eager to be behind a locked door. Room 13 was exactly what I expected. Faded wallpaper, a sagging bed, and a bathroom that had seen better days, but it was a place to rest my head, and that's all I needed. I took a quick shower, the water never quite getting hot enough, then settled into bed with my laptop. Might as well get some work done before turning in. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a loud thump against my door. I sat apart, racing as another thump came, followed by the sound of scratching. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the dark room. No response. Mine. Just more scratching. I reached for my phone, ready to call the front desk, when I remembered the old man's warning, "Don't open the door for nobody." The scratching stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound. In a voice low and growly, "Let me in, please. I need help." Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, but what if someone really was in trouble? I slid out of bed, approaching the door cautiously. "Who's there?" I asked, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Please." The voice came again, more urgent this time. "They're after me. I need to hide against my better judgment." I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man stood there, his face hidden in shadow. But what caught my attention was the dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Blood." "Jesus." I breathed. "What happened to you?" He stumbled forward, pushing against the door. "Let me in, quick." I hesitated for a split second, then made a decision I'd soon regret. I closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it fully. The man practically fell into the room. As he passed under the light, I got my first good look at him. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with wild eyes. And a day's worth of stubble. The blood on his shirt was real. "All right, thank you," he gasped, leaning against the wall. They almost had me. "Who see that?" I asked, closing and locking the door. "What's going on? Should I call an ambulance?" He shook his head violently. No police, no ambulance. They'll find me." I was about to press further when another knock came at the door. This one was different. 3 sharp raps in quick succession. The man's eyes widened in terror. "Don't answer it," he hissed. "Whatever you do, don't let them in." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I approached the door slowly, trying to peer through the peephole, but it was too dark outside to see anything. "Management," came a voice from the other side. "We need to speak with you, sir." I looked back at the bleeding man, who was shaking his head frantically against my better judgment. I called out, "Everything's fine. I'm trying to sleep." A pause. Then, "Sir, we have reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive. Open the door now, or we'll be forced to enter." "Fugitive?" I turned to the man, who was now backing away towards the bathroom. "What the hell have you gotten me into?" I demanded. Before he could answer, there was a loud crash. As the door burst open, 3 men rushed in, dressed in dark clothes that could have passed for uniforms in the dim light, but the guns in their hands were very real. On the ground, one of them shouted, "Both of you now." I dropped to my knees, hands raised. The bleeding man made a dash for the bathroom, but one of the intruders caught him, slamming him against the wall. "Please," I stammered. "I don't know what's going on. He just asked for help." "Shut up," snapped the one who seemed to be in charge. He turned to his companion. "Search the room, find it." As they tore the place apart, I stayed on the ground, my mind racing. Are they looking for? Who were these people? After a few minutes of fruitless searching, the leader grabbed the bleeding man by the collar. "Where is it?" he snarled. "I don't have it," the man gasped. "I swear I don't." The leader backhanded him across the face. "Don't lie to me. We tracked you here. Now where's the package?" My eyes darted to my laptop bag. Oh God. What if one of the other men noticed my look? He grabbed the bag, dumping its contents onto the bed among my papers and cables. Tumbled out a small wrapped parcel I'd never seen before. The leader's eyes lit up. Well, looks like our friend here made a delivery after all." The bleeding man sagged in defeat. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I had no choice." The leader pocketed the package, then turned to me. "As for you, I'm afraid you've seen too much." My blood ran cold. "Wait, please," I begged. "I don't know anything. I won't say a word. I swear." He seemed to consider for a moment, then nodded to one of his men. "Bring them both. We'll let the boss decide what to do with them." As they zip-tied my hands and dragged me to my feet, my mind was reeling. How had a simple night at a motel turned into this nightmare? They marched us out to the parking lot, where a van with blacked-out windows was waiting. As they shoved us inside, I caught a glimpse of the motel office. The old man stood in the doorway, watching him passively. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something. There regret, pity. Then the van door slammed shut, and we were plunged into darkness. The drive seemed to last forever. I lost all sense of direction as we wound through back roads, the van's suspension groaning with every bump and turn. Beside me, the bleeding man was silent, his breathing labored. Finally, we came to a stop. The door opened, and we were roughly pulled out. We were in some kind of warehouse, dimly lit and filled with stacks of crates. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman impeccably dressed and radiating authority. The leader approached her, handing over the package. "Well done," she said, her voice cool and composed. "And these are our loose ends." The leader nodded. "The courier and an unfortunate bystander. What do you want done with them?" She studied us for a moment, her gaze clinical and detached. "The courier knew the risks. As for the other," her eyes locked onto mine. "It's a shame you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, Mr. Alex." I supplied my voice barely a whisper, Mr. Alex. She continued, you see, we can't afford any witnesses. Our operation is far too important. My mind raced, grasping for anything that might save me. Wait, I blurted out. I have skills. I'm a salesman. I'm good with people, with logistics. I could be useful. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Is that so? And you'd be willing to work for us knowing what we're capable of? I nodded frantically. Yes, anything. Just please don't kill me. She considered for a long moment, then smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Very well, Mr. Alex, welcome to the organization. I do hope you're as skilled as you claim for your sake. As they led me deeper into the warehouse, my relief at being alive was tempered by the realization of what I'd just agreed to. I'd escape death only to enter a world I knew nothing about, a world of secrets, danger, and moral compromise. The bleeding man wasn't so lucky. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind me was a single gunshot. That night at the Stardust Motel had changed everything. My old life was gone, replaced by something darker and far more dangerous as I was shown to my new quarters, a sparse room in the back of the warehouse. I couldn't help but think of the old man's warning, don't open the door for nobody. If only I'd listened. The rain was coming down in sheets, obscuring the lonely stretch of highway ahead. I never should have stopped to help that stranded motorist, but I did, and now I'm fighting for my life, praying I'll see the dawn. My name's Mike, and I'm just an ordinary guy who made one fatal mistake. I was driving home after a late shift at the factory, eager to get back to my wife and kids. The storm had been raging for hours, and I was looking forward to a hot shower in my warm bed. That's when I saw her, a woman standing next to a broken-down car, waving frantically. In retrospect, I should have known better. It was past midnight in the middle of nowhere, but I've always been the type to lend a hand, and I couldn't bear the thought of leaving someone stranded in this weather. I pulled over, rolling down my window just enough to hear her over the pounding rain. Oh, thank God, she cried, her blonde hair plastered to her face. My car just died, and I have no cell service out here. Could you please help me? I hesitated for a moment, but her pleading eyes and the ferocity of the storm won me over. Hop, and I said, we can drive to the next town, and call for a tow. Relief washed over her face as she quickly got into the passenger seat. Thank you so much, she said, shivering. I'm Sarah. Mike, I replied, pulling back onto the road. There's a diner about 20 miles up ahead. We can stop there and get you some help. As we drove, Sarah chatted nervously, telling me about her job as a nurse and how she was heading home after visiting her sister. I nodded along, keeping my eyes on the treacherous road. Suddenly Sarah gasped, oh no, I left my purse in my car. All my cards and ID are in there. Could we please go back? I glanced at the clock. It was already so late, and the weather was only getting worse, but I couldn't just leave her stranded without her belongings. All right, I sighed, looking for a place to turn around, but let's make it quick. As I executed a careful U-turn, I failed to notice Sarah reaching into her jacket pocket. It wasn't until I felt something cold and hard pressing against my ribs that I realized how badly I'd messed up. Keep driving, Sarah said, her voice now hard and cold, and don't try anything stupid. My heart began to race as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What's going on? What do you want? Just drive, she snapped. Take the next right. I did as I was told, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to guys like me. I was just a factory worker, a family man. I didn't have any enemies, didn't owe anyone money. Why me? We drove for what felt like hours, the rain never letting up. Sarah directed me down increasingly remote roads, deeper into the countryside. Finally, we pulled up to an old farmhouse, its windows dark and uninviting, parked behind the barn. Sarah ordered. As soon as I cut the engine, the passenger door opened. A man appeared, his face hidden by the shadows and rain. He yanked me out of the car quickly, zip tying my hands behind my back. Good work, babe, he said to Sarah. Let's get him inside before anyone drives by. They marched me into the farmhouse, shoving me down onto a rickety chair in what must have been the living room. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows across the peeling wallpaper. What do you want from me? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. I don't have any money. That's what this is about, the man chuckled, a sound devoid of any warmth. Oh, this isn't about money, Mike, at least not your money. Sarah perched on the arm of a moth-eaten couch, smirking. You see, Mike, you're what we in the business call a good Samaritan, always ready to help a damsel in distress. Makes you predictable, easy to manipulate. My blood ran cold as the reality of this situation sank, and this wasn't a random crime. They had targeted me specifically. But why? The man pulled up another chair, sitting down across from me. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to call your lovely wife Karen and tell her that you've been in an accident. You need her to withdraw $60,000 from your joint account and bring it to a location we specify. No cops, no questions. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you insane? We don't have that kind of money. And how do you know my wife's name? He leaned and closed his breath hot on my face. We know everything about you, Mike. Your job at the factory, your 2 kids, Emily and Jason, the mortgage you're struggling to pay. We've been watching you for weeks. My mind raced, trying to process this information. How had I never noticed? How long had they been playing this? Why me? I managed to ask. Sarah laughed, a harsh green sound. Why not you? Middle-class family man, steady job, good credit score. You're the perfect mark. BKS, don't ask questions when people like you need a sudden loan. But we can't get that much money, I protested. The bank won't just hand over $50,000 even if we ask. The man's eyes hardened. Then you better be very convincing when you talk to Karen, because if that money doesn't show up, well, he pulled out a knife, running his thumb along the blade. Let's just say it won't end well for you or your family. Fear gripped me like a vice. These people knew where I lived, knew about my family. Even if I somehow got away, they could still hurt Karen and the kids. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll do it, just please don't hurt my family. The man nodded, seemingly satisfied. He pulled out a burner phone and dialed my home number, then held it up to my ear. Karen answered. On the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Hello, Karen, it's me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike, what's wrong? Where are you? I took a deep breath, silently praying she would understand. I've been in an accident. I'm okay, but I need your help. I need you to go to the bank first thing in the morning and withdraw $50,000 from our account. There was a long pause. What, Mike, what's going on? Should I call the police? I could feel the man's eyes boring into me. No police, please, Karen, just do as I say. I'll explain everything later. I need you to take the money to the old Miller farm on Route 7. Come along. Another pause, then so quietly I almost missed it. Red or blue? My heart skipped a beat. Years ago, Karen and I had come up with a simple code in case of emergencies. Red meant danger, call for help. Blue meant play along. I have a plan. Blue, I said, hoping my captors wouldn't notice anything amiss. Definitely blue. Okay, Karen replied, her voice stronger now. I understand. I'll do exactly as you said. Be safe, Mike. I love you. The call ended, and the man took the phone away. Not bad, he said. Let's hope your wife is as cooperative in person. The next few hours were a blur of anxiety and fear. I was tied to the chair, left alone in the dark room, while my captors discussed their plans in hushed tones. In the kitchen, I strained to hear what they were saying, but could only catch snippets. As dawn began to break, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart leapt into my throat. Karen was here. The man and Sarah, tense, peering out the window. Suddenly their faces changed from anticipation to confusion, then to anger. The man yelled, "It's the cops!" Everything happened so fast after that. The sound of car doors slamming, shouts of police, "Come out with your hands up!" The man and Sarah scrambled, looking for an escape road, but it was too late. The door burst open, and suddenly the room was filled with police officers. In the chaos, I saw Karen rush, and her eyes wild with fear and relief as she spotted me. As an officer untied me, the full story came out. Karen had recognized the deep press code and called the police immediately. They had set up a sting operation using the money drop as bait to catch my kidnappers. The man and Sarah were LED away in handcuffs, their elaborate scheme in ruins. As Karen hugged me tightly, I finally let myself break down the stress and fear of the night catching up with me all at once. In the days that followed, we learned more about the failed plot. The couple had been running this scam for months, targeting Good Samaritans across three states. They had been watching our family, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. As I gave my statement to the detective, he shook his head in amazement. "You're lucky, Mr. Thompson. If you and your wife hadn't had that code, this could have ended very differently." I nodded, still processing how close I'd come to disaster. "I guess no good deed goes unpunished, huh?" The detective smiled grimly. "Sometimes. But don't let this change who you are. The world needs more Good Samaritans. Just maybe be a little more cautious next time." As we left the police station, Karen squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she asked softly. I thought about the terror of that night, the helplessness I'd felt, but I also thought about the courage Karen had shown and the quick thinking that had saved my life. "Yeah," I said, managing a small smile. "I think I will be." The rain had finally stopped, and as we stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a glimmer of hope. The world could be a dangerous place, full of people waiting to take advantage of kindness, but it was also full of love, bravery, and small acts of heroism. I may think twice before stopping for a stranded motorist in the future, but I won't stop trying to be one of the good guys. After all, that's who Karen fell in love with. That's who my kids look up to, and that's who I am, come rain or shine. The moment I saw those vials of medication disappear into Nurse Samantha's pocket, I knew my quiet night shift had just become a waking nightmare. What I didn't know was that my discovery would plunge me into a world of corruption, danger, and betrayal that would test every ounce of courage I possessed. My name's Alex, and until that night, I was just another janitor at St. Mary's Hospital, invisible to most as I mopped floors and emptied trash cans. Now I'm the whistleblower who brought down a multi-million-dollar drug ring. But getting here nearly cost me everything. It was a Tuesday night, or maybe Wednesday morning. The hours to blur together on the night shift. I was making my usual rounds on the third floor, nodding to the occasional nurse or orderly. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that sickly glow that makes everyone look a little ghoulish at 3 a.m. I just turned the corner when I saw her, Nurse Samantha, a big woman with a reputation for being tough as nails, was standing by the medicine cabinet. Nothing unusual there except for the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. Her movements jerky, and nervous curiosity got the better of me. I hung back, pretending to be very interested in a particularly stubborn floor stain from the corner of my eye. I watched as Samantha quickly pocketed several vials of what I was pretty sure weren't aspirin. My heart skipped a beat. I'd seen enough TV to know what was going on here, but seeing it in real life, that was something else entirely. I must have made a noise, or maybe she just sensed she was being watched. Samantha's head snapped up, her eyes locking with mine. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the truth of what I'd witnessed hanging between us like a live wire. Then she smiled, and my blood ran cold. "Alex, isn't it?" she said, her voice honey sweet, but her eyes hard as flint. "Just the man I wanted to see. Could you come help me with something?" Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where would I go? This was my job, my livelihood. And who would believe the night janitor over a respected nurse? So like an idiot, I nodded and followed her into an empty patient room. The moment the door closed behind us, Samantha's demeanor changed. The sweet smile vanished, replaced by a snarl that made her look more animal than human. "Listen here, you little rat," she hissed, backing me against the wall. "You didn't see anything, got it? And if you even think about opening your mouth, I'll make sure you regret it. Understand? I nodded frantically, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. Yes, I understand. I didn't see nothing. She studied me for a moment, then stepped back, smoothing her scrubs. Good, now get back to work. And Alex, remember, I know where you live. With that chilling reminder, she left, leaving me alone in the room, shaking like a leaf. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. Maybe Samantha was having personal problems. Maybe she was addicted herself. But deep down, I knew it was bigger than that. The way she threatened me, the confidence in her voice. This wasn't her first rodeo. I started paying more attention, noticing things I'd overlooked before, how certain nurses always seemed to be around when shipments of controlled substances arrived, how some patients' charts didn't quite add up, how often Samantha met with Dr. Reeves, the chief of surgery, in hushed conversations that stopped abruptly. When anyone approached, it was like a veil had been lifted, and suddenly I could see the corruption that had been right under my nose all along. I knew I had to do something, but who could I trust? Going to the hospital administration seemed risky. What if they were in on it too? The police? But I had no real evidence, just the word of a janitor against respected medical professionals. That's when I remembered Sarah, a young nurse who'd always been kind to me. She was new, only a few months on the job, and still had that idealistic gleam in her eye. If anyone would believe me, it would be her. I caught her alone in the break room one night, my hand shaking as I poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't really want Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Can I talk to you about something? It's important. She must have seen the fear in my eyes, because her usual cheerful expression turned serious. Of course. Alex, what's wrong? I took a deep breath and told her everything. As I spoke, her eyes widened, a mix of shock and anger crossing her face. We have to report there, she said. When I finished, this isn't just theft, Alex. Patients could be getting hurt. I nodded, relief washing over me. She believed me. I wasn't crazy. But how? Who do we tell? Sarah thought for a moment. I have a friend in the DA's office. She deals with medical fraud cases. Let me reach out to her, see what she thinks we should do. For the first time since that night with Samantha, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could actually stop this. But our optimism was short-lived. The very next day, Sarah was gone, transferred to another hospital. They said no warning, no goodbye. When I tried to call her, the number was disconnected. That's when the real fear set, and they knew somehow. They knew we were onto them. The next few weeks were a nightmare. I jumped at every shadow, convinced I was being watched. Samantha seemed to be everywhere, her eyes following me with a mixture of suspicion and malice. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The weight of what I knew was crushing me. I was seriously considering quitting, maybe even leaving town. When it happened, I was taking out the trash behind the hospital when I overheard voices, Dr. Reeves and a man I didn't recognize. The shipment's late, the stranger was saying, his voice low and angry. My buyers are getting impatient. It'll be here, Reeves replied. We had to change our supplier after that nosy nurse almost blew our cover, but it's under control now. My blood ran cold. Sarah, they'd gotten rid of her because of me. I must have made a noise, because suddenly they were looking in my direction. I ducked behind the dumpster, my heart pounding. What was that? The stranger asked. Probably just a raccoon. Reeves said, come on, let's finish this inside. As their footsteps faded, I let out a shaky breath. I couldn't ignore this anymore. People were getting hurt, maybe even killed. I had to do something, no matter the risk. That night, I made a decision. I would gather evidence, document everything I could, and then I'd go to the police. Consequences be I became a ghost in the hospital. I used my access as a janitor to slip into offices after hours, taking photos of documents and eavesdropping on patients. I noted shipment times tracked, which patients were receiving unusually high doses of certain medications. It was dangerous work. More than once, I nearly got caught, but the thought of Sarah, of the patients being exploited, kept me going. Finally, I felt I had enough. I copied everything onto a USB drive and steeled myself for what I had to do next. As I was leaving the hospital that night, a hand grabbed my arm. I spun around, my heart in my throat, to find myself face to face with Samantha. "Going somewhere, Alex?" she asked, her grip painfully tight. "Jay, just heading home," I stammered. Her eyes narrowed. "Empty your pockets." For a moment, I considered making a run for it, but where would I go instead? I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. Samantha's face contorted with rage. "You stupid little..." She never finished the sentence. At that moment, the parking lot erupted with noise and light. Police cars seemed to materialize out of nowhere, officers pouring out with guns drawn. "Freeze, police!" Samantha's grip on my arm loosened in shock, and I took the opportunity to wrench free as an officer handcuffed her. "Another approached me." "Alex Thompson?" he asked. When I nodded, he continued, "I'm Detective Johnson. We got an anonymous tip about what's been going on here. Said you had evidence for us." Still in a daze, I handed over the USB drive as I watched Samantha being led away along with Dr. Reeves and several others. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police interviews, grand jury testimonies, and media attention. The scale of the operation was even bigger than I'd imagined. Dozens of hospitals across 3 states, millions of dollars worth of drugs diverted and sold on the black market. Sarah resurfaced safe and sound. She'd been the one to contact the police after she was forcibly transferred. Her friend in the DA's office had put her into a sort of unofficial witness protection. As the dust settled and the trials began, I found myself hailed as a hero, but I didn't feel like one. I was just a guy who'd stumbled onto something wrong and decided to do something about it. The hospital offered me a promotion, but I turned it down after everything that had happened. The sterile halls and beeping machines held too many bad memories. Instead, I decided to go back to school, maybe become a patient advocate or work in hospital administration. Use what I'd learned to help prevent something like this from happening again. As I packed up my small office in the hospital basement for the last time, Sarah stopped by. "Oh, you know," she said, leaning against the door frame. Most people would have just kept their heads down, pretended they didn't see anything. I shrugged, a little embarrassed by her praise. I couldn't live with myself if I'd done that. Besides, I had helped. "You're the real hero here," she smiled, shaking her head. "We both did what was right. That's all." As we walked out of the hospital together, the sun warm on our faces, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was over, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that whatever challenges came my way, I'd face them with the same courage and conviction that had gotten me through this ordeal. Sometimes being a hero isn't about grand gestures or superpowers. Sometimes it's just about being willing to stand up and say, "This is wrong," when everyone else is looking the other way. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to change the world. The moment I realized my daughter was missing, the peaceful cabin getaway turned into my worst nightmare. The dense forest that had seemed so beautiful just hours ago now loomed ominously, hiding secrets I was terrified to uncover. My name is Claire, and I'm a single mom to my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. We've been planning this trip for months, a chance to escape the city bond and enjoy nature. The cabin we rented was perfect, rustic but comfortable, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. Instead, it became the starting point of the most harrowing 48 hours of my life. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the late summer sun casting long shadows across the forest floor. Lily was ecstatic, running from room to room in the cabin, her laughter echoing off the wooden walls. We spent that first evening exploring the nearby trails, roasting marshmallows over a campfire, gear and stargazing. It was everything I'd hoped for. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pine and the gentle rustling of leaves. Outside our window, Lily was still asleep, her blonde curls splayed across the pillow. I decided to let her rest, while I made breakfast. As I stood at the small kitchenette flipping pancakes and humming softly, I heard Lily's footsteps behind me. "Morning, sleepyhead," I said, turning with a smile, but the room was empty. "Lily," I called out, moving towards her bedroom. No answer. I checked every room, my heart rate increasing with each empty space I encountered. She wasn't in the cabin. Trying to quell the panic rising in my chest, I stepped outside onto the porch. "Lily," I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. Nothing but bird song answered me. That's when I saw it, Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flopsy, lying in the dirt near the tree line. She never went anywhere without that rabbit. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Lily was gone. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic searching and desperate phone calls. The local sheriff arrived with a small search party, but their grim faces told me what I already knew. Finding a little girl in these vast woods would be like finding a needle in a haystack. "Mrs. Thompson," Sheriff Brooks said, his weathered face etched with concern, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to think. Did Lily say anything about wanting to explore on her own? Did you notice anyone suspicious?" And I shook my head, trying to focus through the fog of fear. "No, nothing. She knows not to wander off. She wouldn't just leave, especially without Mr. Flopsy." I clutched the dirty stuffed animal to my chest, as if it could somehow bring Lily back. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow through the trees, the sheriff approached me again. "Mrs. Thompson, we're going to have to suspend the search until morning. It's too dangerous in these woods after dark." "What? No," I protested, my voice rising hysterically. "She's out there alone. She must be so scared. We can't just stop looking." The sheriff placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes sympathetic but firm. "I understand, but we can't risk losing anyone else. We'll resume at first light with additional resources. Please try to get some rest. We'll need you sharp tomorrow." "Rest? How could I possibly rest when my baby was out there somewhere?" As the search party packed up and the sheriff's car disappeared down the dirt road, I found myself alone in the suddenly too quiet cabin. The walls seemed to close in on me, every creak and groan of the old wood sounding like an accusation. How could I have let this happen? I paced the small living room, alternating between bouts of tears and frantic planning. Should I go out searching on my own? But what if Lily came back and I wasn't here? The rational part of my brain knew the sheriff was right. Searching these woods at night would be suicide, but the mother in me screamed to do something, anything. As midnight approached, my exhaustion finally overtook me. I collapsed onto Lily's bed, burying my face in her pillow, breathing in her scent. "Please," I whispered into the darkness, "please bring her back to me." I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake by a sound, a child's laughter, faint window. I was on my feet in an instant, heart pounding. "Lily," I called out, rushing to the window. The forest outside was pitch black, the trees nothing more than looming shadows. But there it was again, a giggle followed by what sounded like singing. Without thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow path leading into the woods. The singing grew louder, and I could now make out the words. It was Lily's favorite lullaby, the one I sang to her every night. "Lily," I shouted, plunging into the forest. Branches whipped at my face and arms, but I barely felt them. All that mattered was following that voice. I don't know how long I ran, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I stumbled over roots and rocks. The singing always seemed just out of reach, leading me deeper and deeper into the woods. Suddenly the trees opened up into a small clearing. My flashlight beam fell on a figure standing in the center, a little girl with blonde curls. "Lily," I cried, relief flooding through me. But as I moved closer, Claire, the figure turned, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't Lily. The thing that faced me looked like a child, but its skin was pale as moonlight, its eyes black as coal. It smiled, revealing pointed teeth. "Mommy," it said in Lily's voice. But the sound was all wrong, too hollow, too cold. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. The creature took a step towards me, still smiling that terrible smile. "Don't you want to play with me, Mommy? You're not my daughter." I managed to choke out, "Where is Lily? What have you done with her?" The thing cocked its head to the side, an eerily childlike gesture. "Lily's playing with us now. She's having so much fun. Don't you want to join us?" As it spoke, I became aware of movement in the trees surrounding the clearing. More pale figures emerged, some child-sized, others adult, all with those same black eyes and pointed teeth. Terror, unlike anything I'd ever known, gripped me. These creatures, whatever they were, had my daughter, and now they wanted me to give her back. I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Give me back my daughter." The creature that wore Lily's face laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "But we like Lily. She's so full of life, so bright. We need the brightness." The other creatures were closing and now forming a circle around me. I clutched my flashlight like a weapon, my mind racing. What were these things? How could I fight them? How could I save Lily? Just as the circle was about to close, a piercing whistle cut through the night. The creatures hissed, shrinking back from the sound. A moment later, a blinding light flooded the clearing. "Claire, get down!" a voice shouted. I dropped to the ground. Just as something whooshed over my head, there was a terrible shrieking. And when I looked up, the creatures were fleeing back into the woods. A hand grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. It was Sheriff Brooks. His face grim in the harsh light of what I now saw was a floodlight mounted on a truck. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning the tree line warily. I nodded, still too shocked to speak. "We need to get you out of here," he said, leading me towards the truck. "It's not safe." As we drove back to the cabin, the sheriff explained the woods were home to something ancient and malevolent, something that fed on the life force of the young and innocent. They took children, luring them away with false promises and familiar voices. "We've known about them for generations," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We try to keep people away, but sometimes Lily," I whispered, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. "Is she?" The sheriff's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "There's still hope. They don't take the children right away. They play with them first. Draw out their energy slowly. If we can find where they're keeping her in the next 24 hours, we might be able to save her." The next day was a blur of activity. The sheriff called in reinforcements, not just more officers, but people he called specialists. They arrived with strange equipment and ancient-looking books, speaking in hushed tones about ley lines and dimensional weak points. I wanted to believe it was all some elaborate hoax, that any moment I'd wake up back in the cabin with Lily safe beside me, but the memory of those black eyes and pointed teeth was burned into my mind. This was real, as impossible as it seemed. As the sun began to set, the specialists pinpointed a location deep in the woods where they believed the entrance to the creature's realm would appear, armed with an array of weapons, both modern and mystical. Our group set out. The forest seemed different now, more alive, watching our every move. Strange whispers echoed between the trees, and more than once I caught glimpses of pale figures darting just out of sight. Finally, we reached a small cave entrance, half hidden behind it, shimmer strangely, and I could hear faint otherworldly music drifting out. "This is it," one of the specialists said. "The gateway will open at midnight. We'll have exactly 1 hour to find the girl and get out before it closes again." I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "I'm going in. She's my daughter." The sheriff nodded, handing me a strange glowing amulet. "Wear this, it'll protect you from their glamours. And take this." He pressed a wicked-looking iron knife into my hand. "Iron burns them. Use it if you have to." As midnight struck, the cave mouth seemed to waver and expand beyond it. I could see a twisted version of the forest bathed in an eerie phosphorescent light. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through what followed was like something out of a nightmare. The forest on the other side was alive in the worst way possible. Trees reached out with gnarled branches trying to snatch at us. The ground itself seemed to shift and breathe beneath our feet, and everywhere those creatures watched us with their black eyes always just out of reach, laughing and calling out with the voices of lost children. We fought our way through their tricks and traps, the specialists using their strange devices to guide us towards where they believed the children were kept. Every step was a battle, but the thought of Lily kept me going. Finally, we reached a large and hollow tree. Inside, suspended in glowing cocoons, were dozens of children, and there right in the center was Lily. "Mommy," she called out weakly as I cut her free. I knew you'd come. Clutching her to my chest, we ran. The eerie creatures, realizing their prey was escaping, attacked in force. It was chaos, flashing lights, inhuman shrieks. The smell of burning flesh as iron and magic did their work. Somehow, we made it back to the cave entrance with only minutes to spare. As we burst back into our world, I heard the awful howls of the creatures fade away as the gateway closed behind us. The next few days were a whirlwind of hospital visits, police statements, and tearful reunions. Lily would recover fully, the doctor said, though the psychological scars might take longer to heal. As for me, I know I'll never look at a forest the same way again. The world is stranger and more dangerous than I ever imagined, but it's also full of brave people willing to fight the darkness to protect the innocent. We never went back to that cabin, but sometimes, on dark nights, I think I hear faint laughter on the wind, and I hold Lily a little tighter, grateful for every moment I have with her, because now I know the truth. There are things in this world that hunger for the brightness of children, and as a mother, it's my job to stand against the darkness, no matter what form it takes. The security camera feed flickers to life, revealing 3 masked figures creeping through the darkened office. In that moment, I realized my boring night shift had just become a fight for survival. My name's Mike, and I'm a night security guard at Pinnacle Enterprises, a tech company housed in a sleek high-rise in downtown Chicago. Most nights my biggest challenge is staying awake, but tonight I'm trapped in a building with armed intruders, limited resources, and no backup. This is the story of how I outwitted a crew of professional thieves and lived to tell the tale. It started like any other night. I arrived at 10 p.m., relieved the day shift guard, and settled in for my usual routine of monitoring security feeds and making hourly rounds. The building was always eerily quiet at night, just the hum of electronics and the occasional whir of the back system. Around 2 a.m., I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, flipping through camera feeds when something caught my eye. A shadow moved across the lobby camera where there shouldn't have been any movement. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. There it was again, definitely a person trying to stay out of the camera's main field of view. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't some employee working late. The figure was dressed all in black, face obscured by a ski mask. As I watched 2 more similarly dressed individuals join the first, I muttered, reaching for the phone to call the police. But as my hand touched the receiver, the screen went dark. All the screens did. The entire security system had just gone offline. These weren't amateurs. They had somehow cut the building's main power, and the backup generator hadn't kicked in. I was flying blind. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I had 2 choices. I could try to get out of the building and call for help, or I could stay and try to stop whatever was happening. The smart thing would be to leave, but something inside me couldn't just walk away. I checked my equipment, flashlight, radio, now useless without power, pepper spray, and a baton. Not exactly an arsenal, but it would have to do. I knew the building layout like the back of my hand. That would have to be my advantage. Quietly, I slipped out of the security office and into the darkened hallway. The emergency lights cast an eerie glow, creating more shadows than illumination. I could hear muffled voices and footsteps coming from the direction of the executive offices on the top floor. I made my way to the stairwell, careful to avoid the squeaky spots I'd noted during my nightly rounds. As I climbed, my mind raced. What were they after Pinnacle dealt? In cutting-edge AI technology, their servers probably held millions in intellectual property. I reached the top floor landing and peered through the small window. In the stairwell door, two of the intruders were working on the lock to the CEO's office, while the third stood guard, a nasty-looking gun in his hands. My mouth went dry. This was real. These guys weren't messing around for a moment. I considered retreating, finding a place to hide until they left, but then I thought about all the people whose livelihoods depended on what was in those servers. I couldn't just let these thieves walk away with it. I needed a distraction, something to split them up. My eyes fell on the fire alarm on the wall. It was powered by a separate battery system. Perfect. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Then I pulled the alarm. The sudden piercing wail shattered the silence through the door's window. I saw the intruders jump, looking around. Wild Ly, the leader, gestured frantically, and they split up, one heading towards the stairs where I was, the other two continuing to work on the office door. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it over the alarm. The door burst open, and the masked figure rushed in. As he passed, I struck, swinging my baton with all my might at the back of his knee. He went down with a cry of pain. His gun skittered in across the floor. Before he could recover, I was on him, using zip ties from my belt to secure his hands behind his back. One down, two to go. I grabbed the fallen gun, checking to make sure the safety was off. I'm no marksman, but I know how to handle a firearm. The weight of it in my hand was reassuring. Keeping low, I crept down the hallway towards the CEO's office. The alarm was still blaring, but I could hear the sound of breaking glass over it. They must have given up on picking the lock and decided on a more direct approach. I reached the corner and risked a quick glance around it. The two remaining intruders were inside the office now. I could see the glow of a laptop screen. They were already accessing the servers. I had to act fast. Taking a deep breath, I stepped around the corner, gun raised. Freeze, I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Hands where I can see them. They spun around, clearly surprised. For a moment nobody moved, then faster than I could react, one of them reached for his weapon. I fired. The sound was deafening. In the enclosed space, the bullet went wide, shattering a framed photograph on the wall, but it had the desired effect. Both men dove for cover, giving me a chance to duck behind a heavy wooden desk. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Rent a cup, one of them called out. Why don't you make this easy on yourself and walk away? We're not here for you. Can't do that, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Whatever you're stealing, it's not yours to take. A harsh laugh. Noble, stupid, but noble. Last chance, walk away now, or we'll put you down. In response, I popped up and fired again, aiming for the computer. The screen exploded in a shower of sparks, and I heard cursing from the other side of the room. You'll pay for that, the voice growled. What followed was the most intense few minutes of my life. We exchanged gunfire, neither side able to get a clear shot. I was pinned down, but so were they. It was a stalemate, and we all knew it, but they were professionals, and I was just a security guard running on adrenaline and luck. Eventually, Yuli, that luck would run out. I needed to end this, and fast my eyes scanned the room, looking for anything I could use. That's when I saw it, the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall near the intruder's position. Taking careful aim, I fired. The extinguisher erupted, filling the air with a thick cloud of white powder. In the confusion, I made my move. I vaulted over the desk, charging toward wards the coughing, disoriented thieves. I tackled one, driving him to the ground. We grappled, rolling across the powder-covered floor. He was strong, but I had desperation on my side. Somehow, I ended up on top. I landed 2 solid punches before he went limp beneath me. Breathing hard, I zip-tied his hands, then looked up to find them Third intruder. He was gone cursing. I got to my feet. The powder was settling visibility and probing where could he have gone. A noise behind me made me spin around. The last thief was by the window, a bag slung over his shoulder. He had a grappling gun aimed at the building across the street. Our eyes met. Even through the mask, I could see the cold calculation in his gaze. He was weighing whether he could take the shot before I fired. Don't, I said, my gun trained on him. It's over. Police will be here any minute. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, he lowered the grappling gun. Well played, rent a cop, he said, a hint of grudging respect in his voice. Didn't think you had it in you. As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance growing louder. The cavalry was finally arriving. The next hour was a blur of police statements, paramedics checking me over, and a very surprised CEO showing up to survey the damage to his office. By the time things calmed down, the sun was rising, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of pink and gold as I sat on the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The police chief approached me. You did good tonight, son, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Not many people would have had the guts to do what you did. I nodded, too exhausted to form words. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving me feeling drained and slightly in shock. Had I really just single-handedly foiled an armed robbery? Get some rest, the chief continued, but when you're up for it, come down to the station. I think we might have a job for you that's a little more suited to your skills than night watchman. As he walked away, I couldn't help but laugh. 24 hours ago, I was a bored security guard counting the minutes until his shift ended. Now I was a hero with a possible future in law enforcement on the horizon. I looked up at the Pinnacle Enterprises building, the top floor windows still dusted with fire extinguisher residue. Whatever they were going to pay me to clean up this mess, it wasn't going to be enough. But as I watched the three masked men being led away in handcuffs, I felt a surge of pride. I had protected what I was meant to protect. I had made a difference. Not bad for a night's work. As the ambulance doors closed and we pulled away from the scene, I leaned back finally. I had a feeling sleep wouldn't be a problem today, and for once, I was actually looking forward to my next shift. After all, who knew what excitement it might bring? The moment we crossed the town line of Millbrook, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. The fog that had forced us off the highway seemed to thicken, swallowing our car whole. Little did we know we were driving straight into a nightmare from which we might never escape. My name's Jack, and what was supposed to be a fun family road trip turned into a fight for survival in a town that shouldn't exist. It all started when my wife Sarah, our two kids Emma 14 and Liam 10, and I decided to drive to my parents at a place for their 45th anniversary. We'd made this trip a dozen times before, always sticking to the main highway, but this time a freak summer storm forced us to seek an alternate route. Dad, I think we're lost, Emma said from the back seat, her eyes glued to her now useless phone. No signal. Great, we're not lost, honey, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We're just taking the fake route. Sarah shot me a look that said she wasn't buying it either. The GPS had gone haywire about an hour ago, right around the time an old paper map and my questionable sense of direction. As we crawled through the fog, headlights barely penetrating the gloom, a sign loomed out of the darkness. Welcome to Millbrook, where time stands still. Oh, thank God, Sarah sighed. Maybe we can stop and ask for directions. I nodded, relief washing over me. A few minutes later, we rolled into what looked like the town's main street. Despite it being only 7 o'clock p.m., the place was eerily quiet. No pedestrians, no other cars, just rows of quaint shops and houses that looked like they belonged in the 1950s. This is weird, Liam piped up, pressing his face against the window. It's like we drove into an old movie. I had to agree. Something about this place felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. As we approached what looked like a diner, I decided to pull over. Maybe someone inside could point us in the right direction. I'll just pop in and ask for directions. I told Sarah won't be a minute. As I stepped out of the car, the air felt strange, heavy, almost oppressive. The fog seemed to cling to me, damp and cold despite the summer heat. The neon open sign in the diner window flickered weakly. I pushed open the door, a little bell announcing my arrival. Inside, a handful of patrons turned to look at me. Their stares were intense, unblinking. I felt like an insect under a microscope. Hi, I said, approaching the counter, where a middle-aged waitress stood perfectly still. We were a bit lost. Could you point us back to Highway 16? The waitress tilted her head, her movement almost mechanical. Highway 16? Never heard of it, stranger. Why don't you and your family come in for a bite? You look tired. A good meal will do you good. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and calculating. A shiver ran down my spine. Thanks, but we really need to get going. If you could just, I insist. She cut me off, her voice taking on a steely edge. We don't get many visitors in Millbrook. It would be rude to leave so soon. The other patrons were standing now, moving towards me with an eerie synchronicity. Their faces were blank, emotionless. I backed towards the door. Right, well, thanks anyway, I stammered, fumbling for the handle as I burst out of the diner. I could have sworn I heard the waitress say, "You can check out anytime you like him, but you can never leave." I ran back to the car, my heart pounding. We need to go now. Sarah must have seen the panic in my eyes, because she didn't argue. I gunned the engine, tires squealing as we took off down the empty street. Dad, what's going on? Emma asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, sweetheart, but something's not right here. We need to find a way out of this town. As we drove, I noticed more unsettling details. All the clocks in town seemed to be stuck at 7:13. The few people we saw moved in strange, jerky motions, like marionettes on strings, and no matter which turn we took, we always seemed to end up back on that same main street. Jack, look, Sarah gasped, pointing ahead. Through the fog we could see the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign. But we were driving out of town, not in impossible. I slammed on the brakes, my mind reeling. This can't be happening. Maybe we should ask someone else for help, Sarah suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. No. Did you see the way they looked at us, like they wanted to eat us or something? We need to figure this out ourselves. We decided to park the car and try to find a way out on foot. Maybe we'd have better luck spotting an exit without the fog pressing in on all sides. I grabbed a tire iron from the trunk just in case. Sarah gave me a look but didn't object. Stay close, I told the kids as we set off down the sidewalk. The fog seemed to part just enough for us to see a few feet ahead, then close behind us like a curtain. It was as if the town itself was alive, watching our every move. We walked for what felt like hours, but the hands on my watch never moved past 713. The streets were a maze, each turn leading us back to where we started. Panic was starting to set in. Mom, Dad, look, Liam suddenly exclaimed, pointing down an alley we'd passed a dozen times before. But this time something was different. A faint blue glow pulsed at the far end, barely visible through the fog. Should we check it out? Sarah asked, gripping my arm tightly. I nodded. It's the only thing that's changed. It has to mean something. As we approached the light, the air grew colder. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was very wrong here, but it was also our only lead. The source of the glow turned out to be an old television set sitting incongruously in the middle of the alley. On its screen, a man in a 1950s suit smiled at us. Welcome, travelers, he said, his voice tinny through the ancient speakers. You found the heart of Millbrook. Are you enjoying your stay? Who are you? I demanded. What is this place? The man's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Millbrook is a special place, a place where time stands still, where the outside world can't touch us. You should be honored. We don't invite just anyone to join our little family. We don't want to join anything, Sarah said, her voice shaking. We just want to leave. The man's expression darkened. Leave? Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, Millbrook needs new blood every now and then to keep things fresh. A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank. And you can't keep us here, I said, gripping the tire iron tighter. Can't. The man laughed. It was a horrible sound, like metal scraping on metal. Look around you, you're already trapped. The longer you stay, the more you'll become like as part of the town forever, as if on cue. I noticed a strange sensation in my limbs. They felt heavy, sluggish. I looked down. Into my horror, saw my skin taking on a waxy artificial sheen. No, I shouted, smashing the tire iron into the TV screen. The image flickered, distorted, but the man's laughter continued. Run! I yelled to my family. Back to the car now. We took off down the alley, the laughter echoing behind us. As we ran, I noticed the town changing. Buildings shifted, and warped streets rearranged themselves. The few townspeople we saw were transforming too, their features melting like candle wax, revealing something inhuman underneath. By some miracle, we found our car where we'd left it. As we piled in, I saw a crowd of not quite people emerging from the fog, moving towards us with unnatural speed. I gunned the engine, not caring which direction we went as long as it was away from here. The townspeople threw themselves at the car, their hands leaving smears on the windows. I plowed through them, feeling sick. As they crunched under the wheels, we drove blindly through the fog. The town, a nightmarish blur around us. I had no idea if we were going in circles or making progress. All I knew was that we had to keep moving. Suddenly, the fog began to thin through the windshield. I could see the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign approaching. This was it. Either we'd break free or we'd be trapped here forever. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roaring in protest. The sign loomed closer, larger. At the last second, I could have sworn I saw the man from the TV standing beside it, his face a mask of fury. We hit the sign at full speed. There was a moment of resistance, like pushing through a membrane. And then we were through. The fog vanished as if it had never existed. Ahead of us stretched the highway, blessedly normal and fog-free. In the rearview mirror there was no sign of Millbrook, just empty fields. We drove in stunned silence for several miles before I finally pulled over. We all sat there, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. Was that real? Emma finally asked, her voice small. I looked at Sarah, saw the same shell-shocked expression I knew was on my own face. I don't know, I admitted, but whatever it was, we got away. As we continued our journey, now sticking firmly to the main highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd brushed up against something beyond our understanding, a pocket of reality where the normal rules didn't apply. I also knew that I'd never take an unmarked exit again. Some detours once taken can never be undone, and some towns once entered never let you go. We made it to my parents' house late that night. We never told them what happened. How could we? But from that day on, our family shared a bond forged in the crucible of that impossible town, a reminder that in this world there are still dark corners where logic fails and nightmares come to life. And somewhere out there, hidden in the fog, Millbrook waits, hungry for its next visitors. The moment I found that note on my bed, I knew my peaceful house-sitting gig had just become a deadly game of cat and mouse. You can't hide from me, it read in jagged handwriting. Suddenly the spacious mansion felt like a trap, and I was the prey. My name's Alex, and I'm a grad student who picked up a summer job house-sitting for the wealthy Henderson family. Easy money, I thought. Watch their sprawling estate while they vacationed in Europe for a month. Water the plants, feed the fish, enjoy their pool and home theater. What could go wrong? Everything. As it turned out, it started innocently enough. I'd been at the house for about a week, settling into a comfortable routine. The Hendersons had left detailed instructions for everything: when to water, which plants, how to operate their high-tech security system, even a schedule for turning lights on and off to make it look like the house was occupied. I spent my days working on my thesis, lounging by the pool and exploring the massive house. It was the kind of place where you could discover a new room every day: home offices, guest suites, a wine cellar. The Hendersons clearly lived well. It was on day 8 that things started to feel off. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a noise from upstairs, a thud, like something heavy being dropped. I froze, spatula in hand, straining to listen. Silence. Hello, I called out, immediately feeling foolish. I was alone in the house. It was probably just the house settling, or maybe something had fallen over in one of the rooms. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I turned off the stove and slowly made my way upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The upper floor was dark, the hallway stretching out before me like the mouth of some great beast. I flicked on lights as I went peering into each room. Nothing seemed out of place, no fallen objects, no open windows. Everything was exactly as it should be. I was about to head back downstairs, chalking it up to an overactive imagination, when I noticed something. The door to Mr. Henderson's study was ajar. I was sure I'd closed it earlier. I always kept it shut because their cat mittens like to claw at the eye. Pushed the door open wider. The room looked undisturbed at first glance, but then I saw the painting behind Mr. Henderson's desk, a boring landscape that probably cost more than my entire college education, was slightly askew. I approached it slowly, my instinct screaming at me to turn and run. With shaking fingers, I straightened the painting. As I did, I noticed a slight depression in the wall behind it. A safe. Of course, the Henderson would have a hidden safe, but it wasn't fully closed. A sliver of darkness showed where the door hadn't quite shut. My mind raced. Had I accidentally opened it somehow? No, I'd never even known it was there, which meant someone else had been in this room. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. I had to call the police. I had to get out of here. I turned to run in, collided with a solid mass that hadn't been there a moment ago. I screamed, lashing out blindly, my fist connected with something, and I heard a grunt of pain, adrenaline surging. I shoved past the figure and bolted for the door. I made it halfway down the stairs before a hand grabbed my ankle. I went down hard, my chin slamming into a step. Stars exploded in my vision as I tasted blood. Not so fast, a gruff voice said, a man's voice, unfamiliar and cold. I kicked out wildly, feeling a surge of satisfaction as my foot connected with something soft. A hand on my ankle loosened, and I scrambled to my feet, nearly falling again. In my haste, I ran for the front door, fumbling with the locks. Just as I got it open, a weight slammed into me from behind, sending us both sprawling onto the porch. We grappled there on the expensive stonework, me fighting with the desperation of prey, him with the calculated moves of a predator. He was bigger than me, stronger, but I had surprise on my side. He clearly hadn't expected me to put up such a fight. I managed to land an elbow to his solar plexus, hearing the whoosh of air leave his lungs. It gave me just enough time to break free and run. The grounds of the Henderson estate were vast and meticulously landscaped in the fading evening light. The neatly trimmed hedges and winding paths became a maze. I ran blindly, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and my attacker as possible. I could hear him behind me, recovering quickly and giving chase. His footsteps pounded on the gravel path, getting closer with each passing second. In desperation, I veered off the path, crashing through a carefully manicured flower bed and into a dense cluster of trees. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, but I didn't slow down. Eventually, I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. I allowed myself to slow, gulping in great lungfuls of air. My whole body ached, and I could feel blood trickling from scrapes on my arms and face. As my breathing steadied, I tried to take stock of my situation. I was somewhere in the wooded area at the edge of the Henderson property. I had no phone, it was still charging in the kitchen. No idea which direction, LED back to the house or to the road. And somewhere out there a man who wanted to do God knows what to me was searching. I needed a plan. First things first, I needed to find a way to call for help. The Henderson had neighbors, though the nearest house was a good 4 miles away. If I could make it there, a twig snapped somewhere to my left. I froze, barely daring to breathe. "I know you're out here," the man's voice called out, sounding far too close for comfort. "You're only making this harder on yourself." I stayed perfectly still, praying he wouldn't spot me in the growing darkness. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he continued. "But we can work this out. Just come out and we'll talk." Fat chance of that. I'd seen enough movies to know how that talk would end as quietly as I could. I began to move away from his voice. Each step was agonizingly slow, carefully placing my feet to avoid making noise. I'd made it about 21 feet when my foot came down on something that definitely wasn't forest floor. It was smooth, cool metal. I looked down and nearly cried with relief. A maintenance hatch for the estate sprinkler system, and next to it a service phone for the landscapers. With shaking hands I pried open the box containing the phone. "Please work, please work," I silently pleaded as I lifted the receiver to my ear. A dial tone I could have wept. I dialed 911, my eyes scanning the darkness around me. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly whispered my situation and location. "Help is on the way," she assured me. "Where?" "And stay on the line with me if you can." I was about to respond when a hand clamped over my mouth. The phone was ripped away, and I heard it smash against a tree. "Clever girl," the man hissed in my ear, but not clever enough. I drove my elbow back, catching him in the ribs. He grunted but didn't let go. I thrashed wildly, kicking and clawing at any part of him I could reach. We went down in a tangle of limbs rolling across the forest floor. I ended up on top, straddling him. Without thinking, I grabbed a rock and brought it down hard on his head. The man went limp beneath me. For a terrifying moment, I thought I'd killed him, but then I saw his chest rise and fall just unconscious. I scrambled off him, my whole body shaking. In the distance I could hear sirens. Help was coming. I'd done it. I'd survived. The next few hours passed in a blur, police swarming the property, paramedics checking me over, detectives taking my statement. The man, it turned out, was a professional thief who had been casing the Henderson house for weeks. He'd been after some rare coins in the safe, coins I hadn't even known existed. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I'd been in real danger. I could have died, but I hadn't. I'd fought back. I'd outsmarted him. I'd survived. The Hendersons cut their vacation short, flying back the next day. They were horrified at what had happened, but grateful that I was okay and that I'd prevented the theft. They offered me a generous bonus, which I accepted gratefully. Grad school isn't cheap after all. I didn't stay at the house again, couldn't. Really, every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every creak of the house a potential attacker. But as I packed up my things, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. There were cuts and bruises, sure, but there was something else too, a steeliness in my eyes that hadn't been there before. A newfound confidence. I'd faced my worst fear and come out the other side. Whatever life threw at me next, I knew I could handle it. As I drove away from the Henderson estate for the last time, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, certainly lingering fear, but also pride. I'd taken on a hardened criminal, and one not bad for a grad student on a summer job. I don't think I'll be house sitting again anytime soon, but I will be taking some self-defense classes and maybe looking into home security systems for my own apartment, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never know when you might need to fight for your life, and when that moment comes, you better be ready. The moment I saw the rusted SH half buried in the dirt, I knew our innocent camping trip had taken a sinister turn. Little did I know that shovel was just the beginning of a nightmare that would push us to the very edge of survival. My name's Mike, and what started as a weekend adventure with my 3 best friends quickly descended into a fight for our lives against a threat we never saw coming. Looking back, I wonder how we could have been so naive, so unprepared for the darkness that lurked in those woods. It was supposed to be a GU trip, a chance to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. Me, Tom, Dave, and Chris had been friends since college, but life had a way of pulling us in different directions. This camping trip was our way of recapturing some of that old camaraderie. We'd chosen a remote spot miles from the nearest town or cell phone signal. Real wilderness, David said with a grin as we pulled off the main road onto a bumpy dirt track. No tourists, no rangers, just us and nature. If only we'd known what was waiting for us in that nature. The first day was perfect. We hiked, fished in a crystal clear stream, and set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. As night fell, we sat around the campfire trading stories and passing around a bottle of whiskey. It was Chris who first noticed something was off. He'd gone to gather more firewood and came back looking pale. "Guys," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I think I found something weird out there." We followed him into the woods, flashlights cutting through the darkness. About 100 yards from our camp, Chris stopped and pointed there. Half hidden by undergrowth was an old shovel. "So what?" Tom laughed. "Someone left their gardening tools behind." "Big deal." But as I shone my light around, I saw other things: a rusted out tin can, the remains of what might have been a tent. This wasn't just a forgotten tool, this was a campsite, and judging by the state of decay, it had been abandoned for a long time. "Let's head back," I said, trying to ignore the chill running down my spine. "It's getting late." We returned to our camp, but the jovial mood had evaporated. We turned in early, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I was woken in the middle of the night by a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I listened, I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was whistling a tune I didn't recognize, eerie and discordant. I unzipped my tent, peering out into the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint red glow over the clearing. And there at the edge of the light, I saw a figure, tall and lean. It stood unnaturally still. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette against the darker woods. The whistling was coming from it. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" The whistling stopped abruptly. The figure remained motionless for a moment, then slowly, deliberately turned and walked into the forest, disappearing from view. I was fully awake now, my heart pounding. I woke the others, telling them what I'd seen. Dave and Chris were spooked, but Tom remained skeptical. "You were probably half asleep," he said, "dreamed the whole thing." But I knew what I'd seen, and judging by the nervous glances my friends kept throwing towards the tree line, they believed me too. None of us slept much after that. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we were unpacking our gear. We'd planned to stay 2 more nights, but suddenly getting back to civilization seemed like a very good idea. We were nearly finished breaking camp when we heard a scream, high and terrified, coming from the direction of the old campsite we'd found. We froze, looking at each other in horror. That sounded like a kid, Chris said, his face pale. "We have to help," I said, already moving towards the sound. The others followed, our earlier fear forgotten in the face of someone else's dist press. We reached the old campsite, calling out as we went. The screaming had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The rusted shovel was where we'd left it, but now I noticed something we'd missed in the dark. The ground around it was disturbed, as if something had been recently dug up or buried. "Hello," Dave called out. "Is anyone there?" We heard screaming, no response, just the rustle of leaves in the breeze. We were about to give up and head back when Tom spotted something, a flash of color in the underbrush. He reached down and pulled out a child's backpack, bright pink and decorated with cartoon characters. "Oh God," Chris whispered, "there really is a kid out here." That's when we heard the whistling again, the same discordant tune from the night before. It was coming from deeper in the forest, and it was moving away from us. Without a word, we took off after it. The underbrush was thick, branches whipping at our faces. As we ran, the whistling always seemed just out of reach, leading us deeper and deeper into the woods. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing. In the center stood a cabin, old and Decrepit, the whistling had stopped. We approached cautiously, calling out. No response. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. We should go in, I said, though every instinct screamed at me to run. If there's a kid in there, Tom nodded, pulling out his hunting knife. Or I'll go first. The door creaked as Tom pushed it open. The interior was dark, musty. Our flashlight beams revealed a single room, sparsely furnished, a table, a chair, a bed with rotting sheets. And on the walls, Jesus. Dave breathed. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And in every photo was a child, different ages, different races, but all with the same terrified expression. We need to get out of here, Chris said, his voice shaking now. But as we turned to leave, we found our exit blocked. The tall figure from last night stood in the doorway, and now I could see him clearly. He was gaunt, almost skeletal, with pale skin and eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. And he was smiling. Welcome, he said, his voice a raspy whisper. I've been waiting for you. What followed was a nightmare of violence and desperation. We fought like cornered animals, using anything we could get our hands on as weapons. I took a blow to the head that left me dazed, barely aware of the chaos around me. I remember flashes: Tom slashing with his knife, Dave throwing a chair, Chris screaming as the man's hands closed around his throat. And then suddenly it was over. The man lay still on the cabin floor, Tom's knife protruding from his chest. We were alive, battered and bloody, but alive. We stumbled out of the cabin, gasping in the fresh air. That's when we heard it, a small whimper coming from behind the cabin. We found a door hidden by overgrown weeds. Inside, huddled in the darkness, were 3 children. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. They were dirty, terrified, but alive. What happened next is a blur. The long hike back to our car, carrying the children, who were too weak to walk, the frantic drive to the nearest town, the police, the paramedics, the endless questions. We learned later that the man had been abducting children for years. The cabin was his hideout, so remote that no one had ever found it until we stumbled upon it. They called us heroes, said we'd saved those kids' lives. But as I sat in the hospital getting stitches for the gash on my forehead, all I could think about were those photos on the wall. How many hadn't been saved? How long had this been going on? It's been 6 months since that day in the woods. The nightmares have mostly stopped, but I still wake up sometimes hearing that eerie whistle. The 4 of us, we don't talk about it much, but there's a bond between us now, forged in that cabin, that will never be broken. We went into those woods looking for adventure, for a chance to recapture our youth. We came out changed men, with a stark understanding of the evil that can lurk in the quiet places of the world. I still go camping sometimes, still love the peace of the forest, but now I always keep one eye on the tree line, because I know now that the real monsters aren't the bears or the wolves. They're the ones that look just like us, the ones that whistle in the dark. The moment the power went out and I heard that first gunshot, I knew this wouldn't be just enough. Another boring shift at the gas and go. Little did I know I was about to spend the longest night of my life, trapped with a desperate fugitive fighting to survive until dawn. My name's Sarah, and I'm a night clerk at a 24-hour convenience store just off the highway. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I finish my degree. Most nights my biggest challenge is staying awake, but that all changed on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was about 3 a.m. and I was halfway through my shift. The store was empty, as usual for that time of night. I was behind the counter, nose buried in a textbook, when the bell over the door chimed. I looked up to see a man stumble in, soaking wet from the rain. He was tall, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes darted around the store nervously. Can I help you? I asked, trying to keep my voice friendly despite the unease growing in my gut. He jumped at the sound of my voice, then seemed to steel himself. Yeah, a bathroom. I pointed to the back of the store, past the coolers on the left. He nodded and hurried off. I watched him go, noticing how he kept one hand pressed against his side. Something was definitely off about this guy. I was debating whether to call my manager when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The sudden darkness was disorienting, broken only by the faint glow of emergency lights. Great, I muttered, reaching for the flashlight. We kept under the counter. Power outages weren't uncommon during storms, but they were always a pain. That's when I heard it, a car pulling up outside, its headlights cutting through the gloom, then another, and another. I moved to the front of the store, peering out the rain-strewn windows. 3 police cruisers had pulled into the parking lot, the lights flashing silently in the darkness. Officers were getting out, guns drawn. My heart leapt into my throat. What the hell was going on? Don't move. The voice came from behind me, low and threatening. I turned slowly to see the man from earlier. He had a gun pointed at my chest. I said, "Don't move." He growled. "Okay," I said, raising my hand slowly. "Okay, just take it easy. Is there another way out of here?" he demanded. Like and subscribe for 4.